You rise from your sleeping mat in the deep hush before dawn, when the air inside the house feels as still as settled dust. The room around you is dark except for a faint line of starlight seeping through the small, high window where the wooden shutter has warped just enough to leave a crack. You move slowly, folding your blanket once, twice, and placing it at the foot of the mat without a sound that might disturb the other sleepers. Your bare feet touch cool clay tiles worn smooth by generations of footsteps, and you find your sandals by the doorpost where you left them the night before, the leather strap slightly stiff from the dry harmattan air. You slip the sandals on and wrap yourself in a light wool cloak that carries the faint scent of cedar from the chest where it rests, and you lift the latch of the inner door with a practiced, silent motion. The narrow corridor leading out of the house is dark as still, but you know its turns by heart. 3 steps to the left, a shallow step down where the floor changes from tile to packed earth, then the slight brush of a hanging cloth against your shoulder that marks the entrance to the small courtyard. A single potted henna plant stands near the center, its leaves just visible as a dark mass against the slightly lighter sky directly overhead. The stars are clear and uncountable in the moonless night, and a few glittering points catch your eye. The same stars that you will later write about in your manuscript, though you do not pause to name them now. You cross the courtyard, pass beneath the low arch that leads to the outer door, and carefully remove the heavy wooden bar, setting it aside with a soft thud against the mud brick wall. The lane outside smells of dust and the faintest trace of the river that lies south of the city, a smell that arrives only in the cool hours before the sun stirs the air. Sandy soil presses under your sandals as you turn right and begin the familiar walk toward the Sankore quarter. Timbuktu at this hour rests under a blanket of silence, so complete that your own breathing becomes the dominant sound, followed by the gentle crunch of sand grains and the occasional distant bark of a dog, muted by thick walls. You pass the low doorways of neighboring houses, each sealed with its own wooden barrier, and the narrowness of the lane magnifies small noises, a rustle in a chicken coop, the drip of water from a rooftop cistern into a clay jar, the quick scuttle of a lizard retreating into a crack. Your path takes you past the corner where a large baobab tree spreads its roots, a tree that has stood there longer than any living elder can recall. You touch its bark once with your fingertips as you always do, a small gesture of continuity, and the bark feels cool and lightly powdery. Turning again, you enter a slightly wider street that leads directly to the madrasah's eastern gate. A few dim oil lamps burn in niches along the street, their flames small and orange behind glasses smudged with smoke. They provide just enough light to show you where the drainage channel runs along one side, so you can step over it without looking down. Now the first sound of the morning call to prayer reaches you from far across the city, carried by the still air so gently that at first it seems more like a thought than a sound. The voice rises and falls in a melody that you have heard every day of your life, and it mingles with the darkness without disturbing it. You pause for a moment at the sound, orienting yourself, then continue walking at the same unhurried pace until the outer wall of the Sankore compound emerges from the gloom, a long, high stretch of mud brick, reinforced with timber beams, its crenellations just beginning to show against a sky that is turning from black to a deep charcoal grey. You reach the eastern gate, a solid door of acacia wood studded with iron nails, set within a pointed arch decorated with faint geometric patterns that you have traced with your eyes countless times. Before you can knock, the small wicket door within the larger gate swings inward, and the gatekeeper, a man whose beard is as white as the cotton of his tunic, peers out at you with tired but welcoming eyes. You exchange no more than a murmured greeting and a slight nod of the head. He knows you, knows your purpose, and steps aside to let you pass. You step through the small opening into the vast courtyard of the madrasah, and the wicket door closes behind you with a sound no louder than a book being shut. The courtyard spreads out under the open sky, a rectangle of clean sand surrounded on all 4 sides by arcades of pillars and arches. At this hour it is entirely empty, the sand raked smooth from the previous evening, its surface unmarked except for the broad path where water is sprinkled during the day. Across the courtyard, the main prayer hall sits in darkness, its horseshoe arch facing east. To your left and right, staircases ascend to the upper galleries where the manuscript rooms and study chambers are located. You head toward the staircase on the left, the one that leads to the small chamber you have used for many months now, and your sandals make a muffled shuffling sound as you cross the courtyard's open space, aware of the immense quiet that seems to radiate from the thick walls surrounding you. At the top of the stairs, the gallery is a narrow passage open to the courtyard on one side and lined with wooden doors on the other. Each door is studded with brass handles and bears a small carved inscription indicating the subject of the manuscripts within. Your door, the third from the stairhead, is marked with a stylized star and the word Higher, Astronomy carved into the lintel. You push the door gently and it swings inward without resistance because you never lock it. There is no need. The room is dark, but you know its dimensions as intimately as you know the shape of your own hand. Two arched windows face east, their wooden grills letting in only faint threads of grey light. Under the windows, a low writing board rests on two carved supports, angled slightly like a reading stand. Near the board, a simple clay lamp sits on a small brass stand, its spent wick still visible, the faintest trace of burnt shea butter lingering in the air like a memory of last night's labour. You leave the door slightly ajar to let a little air circulate, then cross to the niche set into the left wall where you keep your materials. From the niche you bring out a bundle wrapped in undyed cotton, a reed pen case, a small ceramic inkwell with a cork stopper, a linen blotting cloth, a tiny wooden box of fine sand for drying ink, and a stack of paper sheets that have been sized and burnished to a smooth, almost silken finish. You place each item on the writing board with the same orderliness every time, the pen case on the right, the inkwell above it, the blotting cloth folded beside them, the sandbox at the top left corner, the stack of paper aligned precisely with the lower edge of the board. You run a finger along the edge of the stack and feel its slight give under gentle pressure, the paper cool and faintly textured where the burnishing stone has left a subtle sheen. The room holds on to the night's coolness, and the scent of old leather and dried earth that permeates the madrasah mixes with a faint sweetness from the spent Shea butter lamp. That lamp, still sitting on its brass stand, contains a thin layer of solidified butter in the bottom, pale, yellow, and opaque. You will fill and light it later, once the daylight grows strong enough to see properly, but for now you simply look at it, noting how the wick trails into the spent butter, like a sleeping moth's antenna. You settle yourself onto the woven mat that covers most of the floor, crossing your legs and arranging the folds of your cloak so they do not interfere with your movement. The mat is made of palm fronds, its pattern a simple crisscross of beige and brown, and its surface has become slightly concave under the weight of years of scholars and scribes sitting in this exact spot. You place both hands on your knees and face the eastern window, waiting. The grey light now shows a slightly lighter grey along the horizon line beyond the grille, and the stars that were visible through the window crack have all but disappeared. The building around you begins to make small, quiet sounds as the temperature changes. A timber beam in the roof creaks once, not in protest, but in simple acknowledgement of the warming air. A pigeon on the outer ledge coos softly, the sound muffled by the window grill. From somewhere deep within the madrasah, a student coughs and then falls silent. These sounds do not disturb you. They are as familiar as the creaks of your own home, and you listen to them without focusing on any single one. Your attention rests instead on the slow, almost imperceptible brightening of the rectangle of sky framed by the left-hand window. At first it is only a dark grey square, then a grey with a hint of deep blue, then a blue that gradually pales and spreads across the entire opening. You reach up and adjust your skull cap, then run your palm over your face once, a gesture of alertness, before letting both hands rest again. The cool air against your skin carries no moisture. The harmattan winds of the season have pulled all humidity from the atmosphere, leaving the air dry and clear, perfect for preserving paper and ink. You breathe slowly through your nose, noting the faint dustiness of the air, the tang of old lime wash from the walls, and then the subtle sweet nutty scent of shea butter as the waking air begins to circulate more freely. Now the first direct light of day touches the very top of the window grill, a thin golden line, so faint you might miss it if you blinked at the wrong moment. But you are watching, and you see it appear and slowly thicken, moving down the woodwork with the steady pace of a drop of water running along a string. The line widens into a band, and the band spreads into a soft glow that falls across the writing board, illuminating the stack of paper from the side, so that each sheet's edge catches a sliver of light. Dust motes begin to dance in that beam, rising and falling in slow spirals, some as fine as mist, others larger and visible as tiny points of gold. You track their motion without thought, your mind still and receptive like the surface of a pool before the first ripple. A second beam joins the first, as the sun clears some distant obstruction, perhaps a palm tree in the courtyard, and the two slanting shafts of light now paint a warm parallelogram on the floor mat just to the left of your knee. The light has no heat yet, it is only illumination, pure and gentle, but you know that in an hour it will begin to warm the room's brick walls, and the woven mat beneath you will absorb that warmth and release it slowly. You listen to the madrasah waking. A door opens somewhere on the lower level with a soft bump, and footsteps cross the courtyard light. Quick steps, perhaps a student fetching water. The creak of a bucket rope follows, then the splash of water into a jar, the clink of a metal dipper, and the footsteps retreating. Then silence again, except for the pigeons that have multiplied their cooing, and now begin a gentle flutter of wings against the outer ledge. The sound reminds you of pages turning, and you briefly allow yourself the image of all the manuscripts in this building, hundreds of bound volumes sleeping in their niches, each one holding lines of ink traced by some other hand in some other stillness. You do not hurry. The first grey light was the signal to arrive, and now the full dawn is the signal to prepare the lamp and begin the day's copying. But between these two moments lies a small, quiet space that belongs only to you and the room, and you fill it by simply breathing and observing. You notice the way the shadow of the window grill has now fallen across the lap of your cloak, a lattice of squares and diagonals that shifts ever so slightly as the sun climbs. You notice a small crack in the plaster of the left wall, a hairline that starts near the ceiling and fades halfway down. It was there yesterday and will be there tomorrow. You notice the particular shade of pale ochre that the first sunlight always brings out in the paper's surface, a creamy warmth that no lamp can replicate. Your gaze returns to the spent shea butter lamp. The wick sits curled in the bottom and the butter around it looks like solidified honey, smooth and opaque with a slight gloss where the brass stand reflects the light. You know that you will soon take the small spatula from your pouch, scoop a fresh dab of butter from the gourd you will fetch from the niche, and work it into the bowl until the wick once again drinks deeply. The lamp will hiss softly when lit, but for now it is only a quiet object waiting for its purpose. The light grows strong enough that you can now make out the fine lines on your own hands, the ridges of your knuckles, the faint ink stains that never quite wash from your middle finger. You flex your fingers slowly, testing their warmth, and they move without stiffness. You will need them loose and steady for the hours of copying ahead. You rotate both wrists, then rest them again on your knees, feeling the slight catch of the cloak's weave against your skin. Outside the window, the sky has settled into a pale, uniform blue, and the pigeons have quieted. A breeze stirs the higher air, though you feel none of it inside the room, and the heatless sunlight continues its patient occupation of the floor. In a few minutes, you will rise, retrieve the gourd of shea butter, and light the lamp. A few minutes after that, you will open the source manuscript and begin the first stroke of the day. But for now, in this interval between darkness and labor, you remain seated, listening to the building settle around you, to the distant murmur of prayers from the central mosque, to the almost inaudible ticking of the reed stalk as the pen case expands ever so slightly in the warming air. You are present and at peace, a single scribe at the edge of a long, quiet day. The spent lamp has sat untouched while the dawn grew around it, and now you turn your full attention to that small clay vessel, ready to coax it back to light. You rise from the mat without haste, letting your legs unfold and the blood return to your feet in a gentle warmth before you take the 2 steps to the niche. The niche is a simple recess set into the mud brick wall at waist height, its interior darkened by shadow, and you reach inside with both hands to retrieve what you need. First, the reserve gourd, a dried calabash the size of a large fist, its top fitted with a wooden stopper wrapped in a strip of old linen. Then the small bone spatula that rests beside it, its tip worn to a smooth curve from years of scooping. You carry these 2 objects back to the writing board and set them down on the mat beside the brass lampstand, the gourd making a soft hollow sound as it touches the woven palm fronds. You lower yourself again to the mat, crossing your legs the same way you will sit for hours, and you pull the lamp closer until it sits directly before you. A simple, unblazed bowl of reddish-brown clay with a rounded bottom that fits into the brass stand's cupped holder. The bowl's interior greets you with the face of last night's butter, now set into a semi-solid disc, pale yellow and faintly translucent at the edges where it is thinnest, opaque at the center where it pooled and cooled. The spent wick, a hand-twisted length of cotton no thicker than a child's finger, lies curled against the rim, its topmost tip blackened to a tiny char. You pick up the wick by its dry end and lift it out, noticing how the underside is coated with a thin layer of waxier butter that has not fully solidified, and you lay it across the rim to rest. With the spatula, you begin to scrape the surface of the old butter, not to remove it, but to reclaim it, to stir the settled mass back into a softer, more workable paste. The spatula's edge drags across the butter with the sound of a whisper on silk, leaving faint furrows that catch the low morning light streaming through the window. You work slowly, pulling the spatula from the far rim toward you in a steady motion, then tilting it to deposit the softened butter back into the center, repeating the motion on a different arc until the entire surface has been loosened. The butter releases a faint, sweet, nutty scent, shy at first but growing more present as you stir. A fragrance that seems to belong equally to a kitchen, a bedchamber, and a place of study. It reminds you of roasted caratane nuts, of the women who pound them in wooden mortars beyond the city's edge, and of the long caravan journeys that bring the butter back in leather sacks. But you do not chase these thoughts. They drift past like the dust motes and then are gone. You set the spatula aside and take up the gourd, working the stopper free with a firm twist and a soft pop. The gourd's interior holds a store of fresh shea butter, not yet melted or burned, still carrying the full richness of its raw scent. You tilt the gourd and, with the spatula, scoop out a generous dab. It comes away as a soft lump, creamy and pale as the petals of a desert lily, holding its shape for a moment before settling into a gentle mound on the spatula's end. You transfer the lump into the lamp bowl, scraping the spatula clean against the inner wall, and the fresh butter lands with a dull thud, spreading slightly as it nestles beside the older butter. You add a second scoop, then a third, until the bowl is 2/3 full, the surface now a rough landscape of soft peaks and dips. The coolness of the fresh butter against your fingers, which you wipe with the blotting cloth, lingers as a thin film that you rub into your skin without thinking, a habit older than your memory. Now comes the wick. You pick it up from the rim where it has rested, and you examine its length. The cotton is tightly twisted, the charred tip stubby but still fibrous. You pinch the tip between your thumb and forefinger and gently roll it, loosening the char so that a few fresh threads of cotton appear. You do not cut it, you simply expose a new clean portion that will drink more eagerly. You then press the wick down into the softened butter, sinking it until the wick lies half buried along the bowl's floor, with only the last finger length rising along the rim and curving over the edge like a sleepy serpent resting its head on a stone. You push butter over the submerged portion with the spatula, covering it completely, ensuring that when the flame reaches the bowl's interior, it will melt a reservoir of fuel around the wick's entire length. The tip that rests on the rim you adjust with a small nudge, angling it upward just enough so that the flame will have room to stand without touching the clay. The lamp is now ready except for the fire. You rise again and cross to the door where, on a small metal tray set upon a brick ledge, a covered ember pot waits for any who need it. The pot is a squat iron vessel with a pierced lid, containing a single nugget of charcoal that has been kept alive through the night, its heart glowing a deep, steady orange. You lift the lid, and a breath of heat touches your face, bringing the smell of charcoal so clean it is like the memory of a campfire. Using the iron tongs that rest beside the pot, you pick up the ember, a small chunk that is mostly grey ash on the outside, but crackles with hidden fire when you lift it toward your lips and blow softly. The glow brightens, and you carry it with arms extended, walking slowly so the ember does not jostle, its light painting a fleeting orange circle on the floor that moves with you. Back at the lamp you lower yourself once more and hold the ember just above the cotton tip. Your breath, still gentle from the walk, stirs the tip slightly, and you wait. The flame does not appear at first. Instead, a thin tendril of smoke rises from the cotton, curling upward with a lazy spiral, carrying a smell that is neither butter nor cotton, but something between, the scent of a candle being born. You hold the ember steady, and then the tip darkens further, glows a deep red for a heartbeat, and a tiny yellow flame leaps into existence, small as a lentil, then immediately doubles in size as it finds the oil that has crept up the twisted threads. The flame steadies itself with a soft, rapid flutter, a sound so quiet it is less a sound and more a quality of the silence, and it settles into a still, teardrop-shaped glow of layered colors, a blue hub where it meets the wick, a bright yellow core, and a faint orange mantle that shimmers like the edge of a mirage. You withdraw the ember and place it back in its pot, then return to sit before the lamp, watching it. The flame burns with the steadiness of a stone balanced on a column of its own heat. The air in the room is so still that the flame does not waver, it merely pulses with an internal rhythm, brightening and dimming by a fraction in time with some invisible cadence. The scent of burning shea butter now joins the earlier nutty fragrance, a warmer and slightly smokier note, but not acrid. It is the smell of a clean fat consumed slowly, a smell that you have come to associate with concentration, with pages turning, with the hours between morning and noon. It fills the room without overwhelming it, mixing with the dry earthiness of the walls and the faint dust-mote taste of paper. You shift the lamp on its brass stand, so that the flame aligns with the center of your writing board. The stand has 3 short legs connected by a ring, and you nudge one leg outward until the flame's light falls evenly across the stack of paper, eliminating the long shadow that the pen case had been casting. You watch the circle of warm light that the flame paints on the board, a soft-edged disc of golden illumination that fades at its periphery into the cooler daylight from the window. Where the 2 lights meet, the paper takes on a complex hue, neither fully gold nor fully grey, but something that might be called the color of very old parchment, a tone that invites the eye to rest. You cup your hand around the back of the flame, not too close, and the heat presses gently against your palm, a sensation so mild it is more a promise of warmth than warmth itself. You withdraw your hand, and the flame bounces once, then steadies again. A tiny thread of smoke rises from the very tip, a filament so thin that it vanishes before it can reach the ceiling, dissolving into the air like a thought you forget before you can finish it. The lamp is now fully prepared and working, a small sun of your own making that will accompany you through every line of the day's text. You look at the reserve gourd, still open, and you estimate that you have enough shea butter to keep the flame alive through the afternoon and into the night, with some to spare. You push the stopper back into the gourd with a firm twist and set it inside the niche. Then return to your seat. The lamp's light licks the surface of the paper, showing you the fine horizontal ribs that remain from the papermaker's mold, and you run a finger along one of those ribs, feeling the almost imperceptible texture. You become aware of a sound you had not noticed before, the tiny liquid tick of the butter melting around the wick inside the bowl, a sound like a single drop of water falling into a pool of oil. It is the lamp feeding itself, a continuous peaceful process that asks nothing of you. You listen to it for a while, letting it join the other quiet sounds that populate the room, the distant murmur of the courtyard, the occasional coo of a pigeon, the faint hiss of your own breath passing through your nostrils. None of these sounds demand attention. They simply fill the silence the way the light fills the shadows, softly and completely. Your eyes travel to the source manuscript that you will open soon, its leather cover closed with a tie. The lamp's flame reflects in the polished brass fittings of the writing board, a miniature duplicate flame upside down, its colors reversed. You notice the way the flame's reflection trembles when you shift your weight, though the flame itself remains still. It is a small illusion, and you observe it without surprise, the way you might observe the shape of a cloud that will be gone before you finish looking. The room has warmed slightly, though not in a way that requires you to adjust your cloak. The lamp's heat, added to the sunlight that now paints a longer golden panel on the floor, raises the temperature by the smallest increment, enough that the shea butter scent grows a little rounder, a little more present. You breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, and you taste the faint sweetness on your tongue. It is a taste that generations of scholars in this building have known, a continuity that stretches back further than any single memory can hold, and yet you do not dwell on history. You simply register the flavor as part of the present moment. Your body settles deeper into the mat. your spine finding the slight curve that allows you to sit for extended periods without discomfort. Your hands, still clean from the morning's preparations, rest palm up on your knees, the fingers slightly curled, the thumbs touching the pads of the index fingers in a relaxed mudra. You are not meditating in any formal sense, but a similar stillness occupies you, a quiet alertness that is both wakeful and deeply calm. The lamp, now fully integrated into the space, seems to glow with a patient intelligence, as if it knows what is to come and is content to wait. You glance once more at the window. The sky beyond the grille has shifted from pale blue to a soft, dusty azure, and the edge of a distant palm frond is visible, motionless. The sunlight continues its slow drift across the floor, and you calculate without urgency that you have perhaps half an hour before the light begins to fall directly on the writing board, at which point the lamp's contribution will become less essential. But you will keep it burning regardless, because the dual illumination cool day and warm flame creates a quality of light that pleases your eyes and reduces the strain of fine work. It is a practical choice, but also an aesthetic one, a small preference that you allow yourself without guilt. You notice the wick has developed a tiny mushroom of glowing ash at its tip, a sign that it is burning efficiently. You do not trim it. It will fall away on its own when it has grown too heavy to hold, dropping into the butter with a miniature hiss that you will hear and promptly forget. The flame is burning a little higher now, its top leaning slightly to the right in response to some nearly imaginary current of air, and you watch it lean and straighten, a hypnotic rhythm that mimics the rocking of a boat on a lake. So calm, the water appears solid. Your mind drifts, not in the sense of losing focus, but in the sense of widening its attention to include everything equally. The lamp, the window, the paper, the sound of the distant well bucket, the texture of the mat under your ankles, all of it becomes a single experience, without a narrator. A field of awareness in which you are simply another object among objects. This state does not alarm you. You have entered it many times before, and you will enter it many times again. It is the quiet prelude to the day's labor, the emptiness from which the careful strokes of the pen will arise. After a time that you do not measure, you feel a slight coolness on your left cheek, and you realize that the door, still ajar, has allowed a draft to slip past. You turn your head and see that the gallery outside is still empty, the courtyard below still peaceful, the same gatekeeper visible now in the full morning light as a small white-clad figure seated on a stone bench by the main door. The world outside your room continues at its own gentle pace, and your room continues at its own even gentler pace, and the lamp burns on, consuming a fraction of a drop with each second. You turn back to the lamp and lower your head slightly, bringing your eyes level with the flame's core. From this angle, the blue zone at the base of the wick is more visible, a trembling dome of cool fire that feeds the yellow blaze above. You count 5 distinct layers of color without using words, simply acknowledging their presence as separate hues. The deep blue, the pale blue, the white-hot thread inside the wick, the luminous yellow tongue, the soft orange shroud. They merge and separate in an endless dance, and you let your eyes lose focus so that the flame becomes a blur of gold, a glowing orb without edges, a small captured sun in a clay bowl. Finally, you sit upright again and let your hands fall to your lap. The lamp is ready. You are ready. The manuscript and the paper and the pen are ready. The day has opened its pages before you, blank and waiting. You feel the familiar sensation of beginning, a slight lift in the chest that is not excitement, but something milder, anticipation perhaps, or the simple recognition that a long, peaceful task lies ahead. You reach for the pen case, and the lamp's flame, as if acknowledging your movement, pulses once in a steady, silent greeting. The lamp burns with the steadiness of a star that has found its place in the sky, and you turn now to the source manuscript, the bound volume that will command your eyes for every moment of the day ahead. It rests at the back of the writing board, still wrapped in a loose cloth of unbleached cotton that has yellowed with age. You lift the cloth away, folding it once and setting it aside, and the manuscript emerges into the dual light of window and flame, a leather-bound book no larger than a man's outspread hand, its cover of dark brown goatskin polished to a low gleam by the oils of many fingers. The edges of the pages are softly rounded, the paper within them having absorbed moisture and dryness in turn across decades, and a single leather tie with a bone toggle holds the book closed. The toggle carved into the shape of a small crescent moon that rests against the cover like a charm. You lift the book and bring it closer, setting it on the left side of the writing board, so that it occupies the position a companion might take at a shared meal. The leather tie slips free with a gentle pull, and you open the cover, revealing the first page of the manuscript proper. It is not the title page that is deeper in, but a page of dense, disciplined script, lines of black ink flowing from right to left in the Maghribi hand, its letters compact and elegantly slanting, each one distinct from its neighbors yet belonging to a unified rhythm. The ink has faded slightly from black to a warm dark brown, and in places the paper shows a ghost of the text on the reverse side, a palimpsest shadow that speaks of the thinness of the paper and the care of its maker. You place a small water-smooth river stone wrapped in a strip of felt on the open page so that the book will not close itself, and you lean forward to examine the text. The treatise is a commentary on the fixed stars, specifically the chapter that explains how to calculate the coordinates of a star from the tables of mean motion and the equation of time. You recognize the opening formula because you have copied it before in other manuscripts for other patrons, a basmala written in a slightly larger script, followed by a doxology that praises the Creator who ordered the heavens in perfect measure. Below this, the author's name appears in red ink, a pigment that has held its color better than the black, still vivid as dried pomegranate seeds. The name belongs to a scholar who lived 200 years before your birth in a city far to the north, but you do not dwell on biography. You note his name as you would note a landmark on a familiar road, and you move on. Your fingers brush the edge of the page, testing its texture. The paper is old and slightly brittle at the very margins, but the main body of each leaf remains supple enough to turn without tearing, provided you use the lightest touch. You practice this touch now, lifting the page by its lower corner and letting it fall gently onto the growing stack on the left, exposing the next page. This new page contains a diagram, a series of concentric circles drawn with a compass, the centers marked by tiny pinpricks, the ink lines still sharp and black. Labels in a smaller script orbit the outer circle, and radial lines connect the center to various points on the circumference. You recognize the diagram as a representation of the celestial sphere projected onto the plane of the ecliptic, a tool for visualizing the paths of the planets, and you note that you will need to copy it with exactitude when you reach that section. For now, you simply admire its geometry, the clean confidence of the circles, before turning onward through the pages until you find the strip of goatskin that marks where your work will begin. The marker is a thin strip no wider than your little finger, soft and dark, and it rests between two pages about a third of the way into the book. You open the manuscript to this point and smooth both pages flat with the side of your hand, feeling the slight undulation of the paper where the book's binding has pulled it into gentle waves. The text here resumes its steady course, rows of words describing the sphere of the moon, the first and nearest of the celestial orbs. You will begin with these words, copying them onto fresh paper, and you will continue forward through the book until you reach the place where the author discusses the lunar mansions, a natural stopping point that you have already chosen in your mind. With the source positioned and open, you turn your attention to the blank paper that waits on the right side of the board. The stack holds perhaps 50 sheets, more than you will need for a single day's work. But you prefer to have a generous supply at hand so that no interruption requires you to cross the room. Each sheet is approximately the size of 2 palms held side by side, cut from a larger roll that arrived by caravan from the papermakers of Fez. The paper is cream-colored and smooth, having been burnished on both sides with a polished stone until its surface resists the nib without catching it. You lift the top sheet and hold it against the lamp's light, observing the watermark, a faint circle divided by a horizontal line, the mark of the papermaker's mold. It is centered and evenly impressed, the sign of a quality batch, and you set the sheet down on the board's angled surface with satisfaction. To keep the paper from shifting during the hours of copying, use a simple arrangement of silk cords that stretch across the board from edge to edge. There are 2 cords, each dyed a faded indigo, and they are attached to small pegs at the board's left and right margins. You lift the cords, slide the sheet beneath them, and let them fall back into place. There's slight tension pressing the paper flat against the board without leaving marks. The chords cross the sheet at an angle, one near the upper right corner and one near the lower left, and you adjust them with a fingertip until the paper lies perfectly square. You then place a second blank sheet beside the first, on the left, not for copying, but for testing the pen and for blotting excess ink from the nib. A practice sheet that will accumulate stray marks and splotches throughout the day and will be discarded once it is full. Now, the ink. You reach for the small ceramic inkwell that you set out earlier. A round pot with a narrow neck and a wide base, glazed on the inside with a dark brown slip. The cork stopper comes out with a faint pop, and you peer inside to see the ink's surface, a black mirror that reflects the window's light as a tiny pale square. The ink is made from lamp black mixed with gum arabic and water, and it has been sitting in the inkwell since yesterday, which means it has concentrated slightly as a small amount of water evaporated. You take the small copper water flask from the niche and unscrew its cap, then tilt it over the inkwell until a single drop hangs at the lip, one drop only, enough to restore the ink's fluidity without thinning it too much. The drop falls with a sound so small, it is more a thought than a sound, a minute plink that vanishes into the silence. You stir the ink with the end of your reed pen, a slow circular motion that mixes the new water into the older solution without creating bubbles. The ink clings to the reed's tip in a glossy film, and when you lift the pen, the film drains away slowly, leaving a clean line. The viscosity looks correct, thin enough to flow from the nib, thick enough to stay where you place it without bleeding into the paper's fibers. You bring the inkwell close to your nose and detect the faint metallic scent of lamp black, a smell like old iron and smoke, underlaid by the sweeter gum arabic. It is a solemn smell, a smell that belongs to writing as much as flour belongs to bread. With the ink prepared, you turn to the reed pen. The pen case, a cylindrical box of dark wood with a sliding lid, contains several reeds of varying thickness, each one cut from a mature stalk of river reed, dried and seasoned until they turned from green to pale golden brown. You select one of medium thickness, the one you trimmed yesterday, and slide it free. The nib end has been cut at a precise angle to create a chisel tip, and you examine the cut now, holding it up to the lamp. The edge is still sharp and even, the slit that delivers ink to the tip still clean, but the very point has softened slightly from yesterday's work. You will need to recut it. From the niche you bring out your penknife, a small blade with a short handle of polished bone, its edge kept sharp on a fine-grained whetstone that resides in a leather sheath. You also take the small cutting board, a thin slab of ebony, no larger than a playing card, which you place across your knee. You hold the reed horizontally and brace its tip against the cutting board with your left thumb, then bring the knife to the reed at an angle that you've made so many times that your hand finds it without guidance. You slice away a thin sliver of the old tip, exposing fresh reed, then make a second cut to establish the proper angle of the nib. The knife whispers through the reed with the sound of a page turning, and the slivers fall onto the mat like tiny golden needles. You rotate the reed and make the shoulder cuts, two diagonal slices that narrow the tip into a writing edge, and then the final delicate cut, the slit, a single vertical incision that splits the tip from front to back for a distance of perhaps a grain of rice. The knife must not go too deep, or the nib will gape and release too much ink. Too shallow, and the ink will not flow at all. You judge the depth by feel, the subtle change in resistance as the blade passes through the reed's porous interior, and you stop at the exact moment when the slit reaches the point where the two shoulder cuts meet. You test the slit by pressing the nib gently against your thumbnail, watching for the two halves to separate just slightly, a sign of proper tension. The nib is now ready. You blow across it once to dislodge any stray fibers, then dip it into the inkwell, submerging only the first finger width. You lift it, tap it once against the rim to shed the excess drop, and bring it to the practice sheet. There you draw a single horizontal line from left to right, a smooth stroke that requires no pressure, the weight of the reed alone sufficient to transfer the ink. The line appears black and crisp, its edges sharp, and when you hold the practice sheet up to the light, you see no sign of bleeding or feathering. The ink has bitten into the paper just enough to be permanent, not enough to spread. You draw a vertical line, then a curve, then the letter Aleph in the Maghrebi style. Its tall, upright stroke topped with a small serif. Each mark satisfies your eye, and you lay the pen across the inkwell's mouth to wait for the moment of true copying. You now review the entire arrangement. Source manuscript on the left, weighted open with the riverstone. Blank paper on the right, secured by silk cords. Practice sheet between them. Inkwell above. Pen resting across the inkwell. Blotting cloth folded near your right hand. Sandbox in the upper left corner. Lamp to the left of the board, its flame angled toward the writing surface. Every object occupies its proper station, and the whole arrangement radiates a quiet order that calms something deep in your mind. This order is not rigid, it is simply the shape that the work requires. The way a cup requires a particular shape to hold water. You notice that the lamp's flame has grown slightly tall, its tip now reaching above the rim of the bowl, and you pause to adjust it. Using your thumbnail and forefinger, you pinch the wick's charred tip and break off the blackened portion, which falls into the melted butter with a whisper and a tiny puff of smoke. The flame immediately shortens and steadies, its colors brightening, and the small amount of dark ash that fell onto the butter's surface floats there like a miniature island before slowly dissolving into the golden pool. You wipe your fingers on the blotting cloth and return to your position. The room has settled fully into its morning character. The windows now admit a steady, shadowless light that fills every corner except those directly beneath the writing board, where a soft darkness persists. The temperature has risen to a pleasant neutrality, neither warm nor cool, and the dry Harmattan air keeps the paper crisp and the ink quick to dry. The pigeons on the outer ledge have departed for their morning feeding, and their absence leaves a silence within a silence. From somewhere deep in the madrasah, the rhythm of a student's chant reaches you, a single voice repeating a Quranic verse in a low monotone that rises and falls with the cadence of memorization. The sound is far enough away that the words are indistinct, leaving only the music of the voice. A human hum that blends with the lamp's hiss and the soft creak of the mat when you shift your weight. You place both palms on the writing board, one on each side of the paper, and you feel the smoothness of the wood grain under your skin. The board's surface is a single plank of age-darkened juniper, its edges softened by use, and it has absorbed the oils of countless hands before yours. You imagine briefly the scribes who sat here in previous years, their own lamps burning, their own pens moving, each one adding new pages to the store of knowledge that this madrasah protects. The thought is not sentimental. It is simply a fact, like knowing that the sun has risen on this room for centuries and will rise on it for centuries more. You lift your right hand from the board and pick up the pen. The reed feels light and balanced between your fingers, its diameter comfortable against the joints, its surface slightly rough where the outer skin remains and smooth where the knife has shaved it to shape. You hold it in the traditional grip, the shaft resting between the tips of your thumb and forefinger and against the side of your middle finger, the angle such that the nib meets the paper at a gentle slant. Your hand is relaxed, the wrist loose, the forearm resting on the board's lower edge. You position the nib just above the first line of the blank page, aligned with where the right margin will begin. And you wait. You wait, not because you hesitate, but because you have learned that a moment of stillness before the first stroke improves the quality of the entire page. In this moment, your breathing deepens slightly, your eyes focus on the point where ink will meet paper, and your mind releases all thoughts that are not directly related to the shapes of the letters you are about to write. You listen to the lamp, to the distant chant, to the silence of the room, and you let these sounds carry you into the state of pure attention that copying requires. Then, when the moment feels ripe, you lower the nib and begin. The pen hovers above the paper for one more breath, and then you lower it. The nib touches the page with the lightness of a petal landing on still water, and the first black line glides into existence, a smooth horizontal stroke that stretches from right to left across the top margin. This is the upper line of the frame you will draw around the text block, a boundary that will contain every word you write today. You draw it slowly, letting the reed's own weight carry the ink, and the line emerges straight and true, because your hand has drawn this same line thousands of times and no longer needs to think about straightness. At the left margin you lift the nib, rotate it slightly and draw the vertical border downward, then the lower horizontal, and finally the right vertical, completing a rectangle of crisp black lines that defines the space where the astronomical text will live. You dip the pen again, a quick touch to the ink's surface, and return to the top of the text block. The source manuscript shows you the first words beneath the basmala, and you read them once silently, a passage that introduces the sphere of the moon, describing its position as the nearest of the celestial orbs to the earth, the first rung in the ladder of the heavens. You find the starting point in the source, hold the phrase in your mind, and begin to write. The reed pen moves across the paper in a fluid series of strokes, each letter emerging from the nib as a distinct shape that joins its neighbors to form the words. You write that the sphere of the moon surrounds the earth like a close-fitting shell, that it completes its revolution in 28 days, and that its motion is the swiftest of all the spheres because its circle is the smallest. Your hand moves at a pace that is neither fast nor slow, but exactly measured to the task. A rhythm that matches the gentle pulse of the lamplight and the quiet tick of melting shea butter. Each word requires several strokes, a tall vertical for the aleph, a sweeping curve for the lam, a delicate loop for the nun, and you form them all without hurry, observing how the ink flows from the slit onto the paper in a glossy trail that dulls to matte black as it dries. When you reach the end of the first line, you check it against the source, running your fingertip beneath the original and then beneath your copy, and the correspondence satisfies you. One line complete. You dip the pen and begin the second line, which continues the description of the moon's sphere. The text explains that the moon's orb is not perfectly transparent, but carries a subtle opacity that softens the light of the stars that pass behind it, and you copy this detail with care because it is a point of some debate among the commentators. Your pen traces the letters for opacity and softens and pass behind, and you note with a small inward nod that the author's phrasing is elegant without being ornate, precise without being dry. You let the observation pass through you and return your attention to the shapes on the page. After the moon, the text moves upward to the sphere of Mercury, the second orb, which the author describes as smaller and swifter than the moon's sphere, but subject to a curious oscillation in its motion, a back-and-forth variation that later astronomers would explain with epicycles. You copy the description of Mercury's sphere as it appears in the source, including a marginal note written in a smaller, cramped hand that you recognize as belonging to a previous copyist, a note that clarifies the technical term for the oscillation. You decide to include the marginal note in your own copy, placing it in the outer margin with a small asterisk that matches the one in the source, and you switch to a slightly finer pen for this task, one that produces a thinner line suited to annotation. The fine pen requires a lighter touch, and you adjust your grip accordingly, holding the reed nearer the nib and allowing only the barest pressure to transfer the ink. The marginal note takes shape in miniature letters, each one perfectly formed despite its smallness, and you feel a quiet pride in the steadiness of your hand that you would never voice aloud. When the note is complete, you return the fine pen to its place and resume the main pen, dipping it once more into the now slightly warmed inkwell. The third sphere is Venus, and the author's tone shifts here to something approaching admiration, for Venus is the brightest of the wandering stars, and its sphere lies in a region of the heavens that the author calls the zone of beauty. You copy the passage with an even rhythm, noting that the author describes Venus as a herald of dawn and dusk, a companion to the sun, and you write the word companion with a slight flourish on the final nun because the source shows the same flourish, and you honor such details. The lamplight catches the wet ink and makes it glister for a heartbeat before the paper drinks it in, and the scent of the ink, metallic and faintly sweet, mingles with the shea butter's nuttiness, in a combination that has become as familiar to you as the smell of your own home. The sun occupies the fourth sphere, and here the author pauses to explain that the sun's orb is the source of all light and heat in the sublunar world, the golden heart of the planetary system. You copy this section with a slight quickening of your hand, not from haste, but from the natural momentum that builds during any long session of writing, a rhythm that carries you forward like a boat on a gentle current. The sun sphere, you write, is larger than the three below it and moves with a dignity that befits its rank, completing its annual circuit in 365 days, plus a fraction. The author includes a small table of the sun's daily motion in minutes and seconds of arc, and you prepare yourself for the careful work of copying figures. Tables require a different mode of attention than prose, and you pause before beginning this portion to recenter your focus. You blot the last line of text with a linen cloth, a soft press that lifts any excess ink, then sprinkle a pinch of fine sand from the box across the damp. Letters are light dusting, like the first snow that never falls on Timbuktu. You wait to count to 10, then tilt the board gently so that the sand runs off into the small tray you keep for this purpose, leaving behind a clean, dry surface that will not smudge. The sand grains that remain in the tray glitter faintly in the lamplight, tiny crystals of quartz mixed with darker specks that you have never bothered to identify. Now you turn to the table. The source presents a grid of 5 columns and 12 rows, and you will need to replicate its proportions exactly. You take up the ebony ruler from the niche, a slender strip of dark wood marked with tiny notches along its length, each notch representing a standard unit of measurement. The ruler is cool and heavy for its size, and it lies flat against the paper without rocking. You align it with the left margin and, using a blunt stylus rather than the inked pen, you trace a faint guideline down the page, a line that will be invisible once the table is complete, but that ensures every vertical column aligns. You then score the horizontal guidelines, spacing them evenly with the ruler's notches, working from the top of the table area to the bottom. The stylus leaves no ink, only a slight indentation that the nib will later follow, and you apply just enough pressure to guide the eye without tearing the paper's surface. With the guidelines in place, you pick up the inked pen and begin drawing the table's borders, a heavier line that encloses the entire grid. Then the internal lines, thinner and more delicate, separating the columns and rows. You work methodically, dipping the pen for each line, and the repetitive motion of draw and dip becomes a kind of meditation, your mind settling into the exact spacing required. The table emerges on the page as a structure of clean geometry, a skeleton that you will now fill with numbers. The first column lists the days of the month, from 1 to 30, and you write these in sequence with the ease of long practice. The second column gives the sun's longitude in degrees and minutes, and you copy each value from the source, checking each one against your copy before moving to the next. The numbers are written in the Eastern Arabic notation, small and precise, and you form each digit with the same care you gave to the letters, the 1 a simple vertical, the 2 a curved hook, the 3 a double curve, and so on. The third column presents the sun's anomaly, the correction factor that accounts for the eccentricity of its orbit, and you fill this column with particular attention because the values change in a pattern that requires you to stay alert, resisting the lull of the repetition. The fourth and fifth columns give the sun's declination and its right ascension, and you complete them without interruption, the pen moving across the page as steadily as the sun itself moves across the sky. When the table is finished, you set down the pen and flex your fingers, opening and closing them slowly, to release the small tension that accumulates in the joints during precise work. You examine the completed grid, running your eyes down each column to verify alignment, and you find no errors, no wavering lines, no misplaced numbers. The table sits on the page like a well-built room, its walls straight and its corners square, and you permit yourself a single, slow blink of satisfaction before moving on. The text resumes after the table, and you take up the pen again, dipping it into the inkwell which you now notice has lowered slightly from its morning level, a sign of the work you have done, measured in drops of lamp black. The author transitions from the sun to the fifth sphere, that of Mars, which he describes as the ruddy planet, the one whose color resembles the ember of a cooling fire. You copy this description and add the astronomical details that follow. Mars completes its circuit in approximately 2 years, and its sphere is the first of the outer planets, lying beyond the sun's orb. The author notes that Mars sometimes moves backward against the stars, a retrograde motion that puzzled the ancients, and you copy this observation with a steady hand, adding the small diagram of a looping path that the source includes in the margin. The diagram is a simple loop, no larger than your thumbnail, and you draw it with the fine pen, the curve requiring a smooth rotation of the wrist that you execute in a single motion. The loop's ends meet perfectly, the ink line closing on itself without overlap, and you let it dry while you return to the main text. Jupiter's sphere comes next, the sixth and largest of the planetary orbs the author has so far described. You write that Jupiter is the benevolent planet. its sphere vast and slow, taking 12 years to circle the Earth. The author includes a passage about Jupiter's influence, a soft aside about the planet's steady golden light, and you copy it without comment, though you note that the author's tone has become more reflective here, almost poetic. The contrast with the dry tables pleases you, a small shift in texture that keeps the mind engaged without exciting it, and your pen adapts to the change, the strokes becoming slightly more flowing as you transcribe the lyrical passage. The seventh sphere belongs to Saturn, the most distant and slowest of the visible planets, and you copy its description with the same patient care. Saturn's orb, the text explains, is the boundary between the realm of the wandering stars and the realm of the fixed stars, a frontier marked by cold and distance. The author gives Saturn's orbital period as 30 years, and you write the number carefully, aware that this figure has been known since the time of the Babylonians, passed down through the Greeks and the Arabs, and now arriving on your page in this quiet room in Timbuktu. The continuity of it, the long chain of hands. Copying hands passes through your mind like a faint breeze and then is gone, leaving behind only the black ink on the cream paper. After Saturn, the author turns to the eighth sphere, the sphere of the fixed stars, and here the text changes character again, becoming dense with descriptions of constellations and stellar magnitudes. You know that this section will occupy many pages, and you pause before beginning it, taking a sip of water from the small cup that has been sitting unnoticed near your knee. The water is room temperature now, slightly warm from the lamp's proximity, and it tastes faintly of the clay vessel that holds it. You swallow slowly, replace the cup, and wipe your lips with the back of your hand. The sphere of the fixed stars, the author writes, contains all the visible stars that do not wander, and it rotates once around the Earth in a single day and night, a motion so regular that it has become the foundation of all timekeeping. You copy this explanation and add the detail that follows. The sphere of fixed stars moves not only daily, but also with a much slower motion called the precession, a creeping displacement that shifts the equinoxes by 1 degree every 100 years. The author cites the ancient measurements that established this rate, and you write the numbers with the same exactness you gave to the planetary tables, each digit a small monument to the astronomers who first observed the slow drift of the seasons against the stars. The precession passage includes a description of how the pole star of one age becomes an ordinary star in another, and you find yourself pausing briefly at this image. The thought that the sky itself changes, that the heavens that the author knew are not quite the heavens you know. The pause lasts only a moment, and then your pen continues, carrying you past the reflection and back into the steady stream of copying. The light in the room has shifted while you worked, the patch of direct sun that once covered the floor having retreated to a narrow golden band near the far wall. The lamplight, which earlier competed with the daylight, now stands as the dominant illumination over the writing board, its glow warmer and more intimate than the indirect sun. You notice the change without interrupting your work, your mind recording the passage of the morning in the same way it records the shapes of the letters, automatically and without commentary. The author concludes the section on the spheres with a brief mention of the ninth orb, the primum mobile, the outermost sphere that has no stars of its own and exists only to impart motion to all the lower orbs. You copy the final sentence of this section, a sentence that describes the primum mobile as the first creation, the mover that is itself unmoved, and then you place a small mark in the margin to indicate the end of the chapter. The mark is a stylized flower of 4 petals, the same mark that appears in the source, and you draw it with the fine pen, each petal a single smooth curve. You set the pen down and rest both hands on your knees, palms upward. The first major section of the day's work is complete, and the page before you holds perhaps an hour's worth of labor, a neat grid of text and numbers and diagrams that now belongs to the madrasah's collection. You look at it not with pride, but with a quiet sense of rightness, the feeling of a tool returned to its proper place or a door closed without sound. The lamp burns on. The Shea butter has melted into a clear golden pool round the wick, and the afternoon waits beyond the window, patient and unhurried. The completed page on the spheres rests under the lamp's steady glow, its ink long dry, and you turn your attention to the next opening in the source manuscript, where the author transitions from the description of the celestial orbs to the practical heart of the work, the tables of planetary motion. These tables lie across a double-page spread in the old book, the paper slightly darker at the center fold where fingers have pressed it open countless times, and the grid lines, drawn in faded red ink, still hold their sharpness after a century of use. You place the river stone on the outer margin to keep the pages flat, then lean forward to study the layout before you commit a single mark to your own paper. The first table is a large one, occupying the entirety of the left-hand page and spilling onto the right, its columns dense with numbers that represent the mean daily motion of the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets. Each column is headed by the name of the celestial body written in a compact script, and beneath each heading the days of the month run vertically from top to bottom, with the corresponding position values filling the cells. You count the columns silently, 7 in total, 1 for each planet, plus a narrow column on the far left for the day number. The rows number 30, as is the custom for a standard month, and you will need to replicate this entire arrangement on a fresh sheet of paper, matching every digit, every alignment, every faint marginal note. Before you begin the table itself, you prepare a new sheet of paper, lifting it from the stack and securing it under the silk cords. The new sheet catches the lamp's light with a slight sheen, its surface burnished smooth enough to reflect a fuzzy image of the window grille. You test the surface with a dry fingertip, feeling the cool, even texture, and then set the ebony ruler across the top edge, aligning it with the margin you will establish. The ruler's notches click softly against the edge of the writing board as you position it, and you press down with your left hand to hold it steady while your right hand takes up the blunt stylus, the same tool that scored the guidelines for the previous table. This stylus is a simple piece of polished bone, tapered at one end to a rounded point that leaves a faint groove on the paper without tearing it, and you draw the first horizontal guideline with a single unhurried motion, moving from right to left and letting the ruler guide your hand. You score 8 more horizontal lines at regular intervals, each one exactly 1 notch apart on the ruler, creating a stack of narrow rows that will contain the planetary positions. Then, turning the ruler vertically, you score the column boundaries, a narrow left-hand column for the day numbers, 7 wider columns for the planets, and a narrow right-hand column for any annotations. The guidelines form a faint grid on the paper, invisible at a casual glance but clear enough to your trained eye, and the process of scoring them takes perhaps 10 minutes, in which your attention shrinks to the simple geometry of lines and spaces, the rest of the room receding to a soft periphery of lamplight and quiet. With the grid scored, you change tools, putting aside the stylus and picking up the reed pen. The ink has thickened slightly in the well because of the dry air, and you add a single drop of water from the copper flask, stirring it in with the pen's tip before you begin. The first task is to ink the outer border of the table, a heavy frame that will enclose the entire structure, and you draw it with the same calm precision you used for the earlier page, the nib skating over the paper in a straight line, pausing at the corners where you turn the pen and continue without lifting. The border closes on itself with a neat join, and you dip the pen again for the internal lines, drawing the vertical column dividers first, then the horizontal row dividers, each stroke a single, fluid motion that connects the scored guidelines into visible ink. The grid now stands complete on the page, a skeleton awaiting its numbers. You turn to the source manuscript and locate the first cell of the first column, the heading for the sun, written in a slightly larger script than the data below. You copy this heading onto your page, forming the word al-Shams with careful strokes, the shin a triple wave, the mim a closed circle. Beneath it, in the first data row, the source gives the sun's longitude for the first day of the month as 3 signs, 28 degrees and 41 minutes, expressed in the notation you have used since your earliest training. You write the numbers in order, pausing after each one to verify that your numeral matches the original. The 3 is a curved hook with a short tail. The 28 combines the symbols the 20 and 8 in a single compact figure, and the 41 nestles beside them in the minutes column. You move down the column row by row, the sun's longitude increasing each day by a nearly constant increment of 59 minutes and 8 seconds. The repetition of the addition pattern creates a soft rhythm in your mind, a quiet chant of numbers that requires no active thought, the kind of rhythm that, if sustained long enough, can carry you into a state resembling sleep while your hand remains perfectly awake. You note the small deviations in the increment the seconds column, occasionally rounds up, occasionally down, and you incorporate these exactly as the source shows them, without questioning the astronomer's calculations. Your role is transmission, not analysis, and the humility of that role feels, in this moment, like a kind of peace. The sun's column ends at day 30 with a longitude of 4 signs, 28 degrees, and a handful of minutes that you copy and verify. You then move to the second column, the moon, which presents a more complex set of values because the moon moves faster and its position changes more dramatically from day to day. The heading reads Al-Qamar, and you write it with the same deliberate strokes. The Kaf a circle with 2 dots above, the Ra a gentle curve that descends below the line. The moon's column requires more frequent checking against the source because the daily increment is not constant, but varies according to the moon's anomaly, and the author has included this anomaly in a separate subcolumn that you must also reproduce. You add the anomaly subcolumn as a thin insertion within the moon's main column, drawing a faint vertical line with the fine pen and labeling the top Al-Qasr in miniature script. The values for the anomaly run from 0 to 360 degrees over the course of the month, and they follow a sign-like pattern that you recopy without needing to understand its mathematical origins. The extra work of the subcolumn slows your pace slightly, but the slowing is welcome. A deepening of the calm that the table work induces, like reaching the center of a lake where the water is stillest. After the moon comes Mercury, the third column headed by the word Utarid in the same compact script. Mercury's daily motion is rapid and erratic from the perspective of Earth, and the table reflects this with values that sometimes advance and sometimes retreat, a reflection of the planet's apparent retrograde loops. You copy the retreating values without pausing to find meaning in them, simply transcribing digit after digit, and the ebb and flow of the numbers across the page becomes a landscape of abstract forms, hills and valleys of ink that your hand traverses with a steady gait. The lamp requires attention midway through the Mercury column. The flame has begun to flicker, a sign that the wick has consumed the butter around it and needs more fuel to draw upon. You pause in your copying, set down the pen with its nib resting on the practice sheet, and reach for the spatula and the reserve gourd. The gourd stopper comes out with a soft pop, and you scoop a fresh dollop of shea butter, pale and creamy, and deposit it into the bowl beside the wick. The new butter begins to melt almost immediately, its edges softening and spreading, and the flame steadies once more, its light strengthening as the wick drinks deeper. You push a small amount of butter over the submerged portion of the wick with a spatula, then wipe the spatula on the blotting cloth and return it to its place. The interruption has lasted perhaps a minute, and you resume the Mercury column at the exact point where you stopped, the digit half-formed in your mind already finding its way onto the page. The fourth column belongs to Venus, Al-Zuhara, the bright morning star that the author earlier described as a herald of dawn. The Venus table is similar to Mercury's, with its own retrograde variations and its own subcolumn for the planet's anomaly, and you copy it with the same methodical patience. By now your hand has settled into a deep groove of motion. Dip the pen, blot the excess on the practice sheet, write a numeral, check against the source, write the next numeral, check again, dip the pen when the ink runs thin. The repetition is so complete that it ceases to be repetition and becomes a single continuous action, a smooth flow of attention that has no beginning and no end, only the present moment of the nib touching paper. The room around you has warmed further, the sun now high enough that the courtyard's white sand reflects a diffuse glare through the window grille, adding a cooler, ambient light to the lamp's warm glow. The combined illumination is restful to the eye, reducing the contrast between the bright paper and the darker room, and you find that you can work without squinting or straining. You hear, very distantly, the sound of a lesson being conducted in one of the lower chambers. The rise and fall of a teacher's voice followed by the unison murmur of students repeating a phrase. The sound is rhythmic and soft, like a lullaby sung in an unknown language, and it weaves itself into the texture of the quiet without breaking it. Mars Almeric occupies the fifth column, its daily motion slower than that of the inner planets, but subject to a notable retrograde loop that the table captures across several rows. You copy the forward values with ease and then slow your hand for the retrograde portion, where the longitude decreases instead of increasing, the numbers ticking backward as the planet appears to move against the stars. The transition point, where the motion changes direction, is marked in the source by a small red dot of ink, and you replicate the dot on your own page using the fine pen, and a dot of the red ink you keep in a separate tiny container. a pigment made from ground cinnabar mixed with gum, the color as vivid as a drop of fresh blood. The red dot dries quickly, and you continue through the rest of the Mars column, the numbers resuming their forward march. Jupiter follows in the sixth column, al-Mushtari, a column of serene, almost glacial progress, the daily motion being less than 5 minutes of arc. The smallness of the numbers requires a tighter script, and you adjust your grip on the pen to produce finer strokes, the nib barely skimming the paper. The Jupiter values fill the 30 rows with a quiet orderliness, each day's position only slightly advanced from the previous, and the column when complete looks like a gentle staircase of ink, each step a small triumph of precision. The seventh and final column belongs to Saturn, Zuhul, the slowest of the visible planets, whose daily motion is so slight that the values in the table change by less than 2 minutes per day. You copy these tiny increments with the same gravity you would give to a sacred text, because in the author's cosmology, every orbital motion reflects the perfection of the divine order, and a mere 2 minutes of arc deserved as much reverence as a blazing comet. The Saturn column takes longer to copy than the others, not because the numbers are complex, they are the simplest of all, but because the difference between one row and the next is so minimal that you must check each value twice to be certain you have not inadvertently repeated the previous entry. When the last Saturn entry is written and verified, you set down the pen and look at the full table, a dense but orderly array of numbers spanning the entire sheet. The ink has dried to a uniform matte black, the grid lines are straight, the headings are legible, and the red dot beside the Mars retrograde stands like a small jewel in the monochrome landscape. You allow yourself a long, slow exhale, the kind of breath that releases tension you did not know you were holding, and you feel the muscles of your shoulders loosen slightly under the weight of your cloak. The source manuscript contains more tables beyond this one: tables of the planet's latitudes, tables of the equation of time, tables of the celestial houses, and you will copy them in the hours ahead. But for now, this single page of daily motion stands complete, a faithful duplicate of the astronomer's work, and the satisfaction of that fidelity spreads through you like warmth from the lamp, gentle and without demand. You rest your hands on your knees again, palms up, and listen to the madrasah breathing around you, the distant recitations, the cooing pigeons, the faint scratching of another scribe in a neighboring room, and you wait for the impulse to begin the next page, to rise and carry you forward. The morning's tables are complete and drying, the ink settled deep into the paper's fibers, and the room around you has changed without announcement. The sun, which earlier hung low enough to send its light sideways through the window grill, now stands nearly overhead, and its rays fall more directly onto the flat roof of the madrasah, heating the mud bricks from above. The air inside the room grows warmer by slow degrees, not the fierce heat of a Timbuktu afternoon in the dry season, but a gentle, enclosing warmth that rises from the walls and the floor and wraps around you like a second cloak. You feel it first on the crown of your head, then on your shoulders, and you loosen the neck of your tunic by a finger's width, letting a small pocket of cooler air find your skin. The lamp has been burning for hours, and the shea butter in the bowl has melted entirely into a clear, golden liquid, with a faint cloudiness at the bottom where tiny impurities have settled. The wick, which was crisp and white this morning, is now a dark stub, its exposed tip crusted with a small knob of carbon that glows dull orange when the flame wavers. The flame itself has grown taller and more restless, flickering in a rhythm that tells you it is drawing butter faster than the wick can deliver it, a sign that the lamp needs tending. You set down the pen, placing it across the inkwell's mouth, with the nib pointing outward, and you gather the spatula, the reserve gourd, and the small pair of brass snuffers that live in the niche for trimming wicks. The gourd feels lighter now, its contents diminished by the morning's consumption, but it still holds enough butter for the hours ahead and into the night. You twist out the stopper and set it aside, then lean over the lamp, bringing your face close enough to feel the heat radiating from the flame. With the spatula, you scoop a generous portion of fresh butter, a soft mound that keeps its shape for a moment before sliding off the spatula into the bowl with a quiet plop. The new butter hits the hot liquid and begins melting at the edges, sending out thin, translucent tendrils that swirl into the golden pool like cream into tea. You stir gently, blending the fresh butter with the old, and the flame steadies almost at once, its flickering replaced by the smooth, upright calm that you rely upon. Now the wick, You lift the brass snuffers, a small scissor-like tool with flat, blunt blades designed not to cut but to pinch away the charred tip without damaging the cotton below. The snuffers are warm from resting near the lamp, and their handles fit your fingers with a comfortable weight. You bring the blades to either side of the blackened wick tip, the metal hovering just above the flame, and you squeeze gently, closing them around the brittle carbon. A small crackle sounds, and the tip breaks away, falling into the mated butter where it floats for a second before sinking. The flame vanishes for a heartbeat, then rekindles itself from the exposed, clean wick, shorter now and burning with a brighter, steadier light. You open the snuffers, tap off any clinging ash into the tray, and return them to the niche, the task completed in less time than it takes to describe it. With the lamp refreshed, you turn your gaze to the window and notice that the quality of daylight has shifted. The harsh glare of midday has softened, and a thin veil of high cloud, invisible from the courtyard, but detectable by the way the shadows have loosened their edges, has drifted across the sun. The shadow of the window grill on the floor, which had been a crisp lattice of dark lines, now lies blurred, its corners rounded by the diffuse light. You watch the shadow for a moment, observing how it breathes with the passing clouds, sharpening when the sun emerges, softening when another wisp of vapor crosses the disk. The play of light and shadow moves across the mat in slow pulses, a silent tide that asks nothing of you. You settle back onto the mat, adjusting your position so that the renewed lamp and the window's indirect light strike the writing board from two angles, creating a layered illumination that is gentle on the eyes. The paper glows with a warm, complex tone, the edges of the text slightly shadowed, the center bright. You take up the pen, dip it into the ink that has now reached the perfect consistency, neither too thick nor too thin, and you turn the source manuscript to the new section that follows the planetary tables, the lunar mansions or Manazil al-Qamar, the 28 stations through which the moon passes each month. The source page opens with a heading in red ink, the words Bab al-Manazil written in a stately script, and below it the author has arranged the 28 mansions in a numbered list, each entry accompanied by a brief description and, in many cases, a small diagram of stars connected by dotted lines. The text explains that the Arabs of the desert have known these mansions since before the time of the Prophet, naming them for the shapes they saw in the stars and using them to mark the seasons and predict the rains. You have always found this section of the treatise to be one of its quietest pleasures, the blend of practical astronomy and folk wisdom that settles into the mind like a familiar story. You begin with the first mansion al-Sharatan, the two signs, which the author places in the constellation Aries. The source text describes it as two small stars close together near the horn of the ram, and it notes that the moon's passage through this mansion brings the beginning of the planting season in certain lands. You copy the Arabic name, forming the letters with a slightly slower pace than you used for the tables, because the poetic quality of the mansion names deserves a hand that respects their music. Next to the name, you draw a tiny pattern of two dots connected by a thin line, the star diagram that will help a reader locate the mansion in the night sky. The dots are simple ink drops applied with a fine pen, and the line is a single unhurried stroke that arcs gently between them. You then copy the description, writing that these two stars mark the first step of the moon's monthly journey, and that she appears in them as a thin crescent, soft as a paring of thumbnail. The second mansion is Al-Brutine, the little belly, a faint grouping of stars that the author says resembles a small animal's stomach. You copy the name and the diagram, 3 dots this time arranged in a shallow triangle, and you read the description, a mansion of little rain but gentle winds, a time when travelers can move safely across the desert because the nights are clear and the heat has not yet arrived. Your pen moves across the page, and the lamplight catches the wet ink, making the tiny diagram glisten before it dries. The third mansion, Al-Thuraya, the Pleiades, requires a larger diagram, a tight cluster of 6 stars that the author draws as a tiny rosette. You know this cluster from your own observations of the winter sky, a glittering knot of light that the Arabs call the Little Mother, and that the author associates with abundant rain when the moon passes near it. You draw the 6 dots with particular care, spacing them evenly in a small circle, and you add the wisp of nebula that the author mentions by using the very tip of the pen to stipple a faint haze around the stars. The description notes that Al-Thuraya brings the heavy rains of the Kharif season, and you copy the word Kharif with its deep, throaty Ka sound resonating silently in your mind as you write. You move through the mansions one by one, each entry following the same pattern name, diagram, description, and the repetition becomes a soothing cycle that carries you deep into the afternoon. Aldebaran, the follower, a single bright star that trails the Pleiades like a shepherd, its influence bringing the first heat of summer. Al-Haka, the white spot, 3 faint stars beneath Orion that signal the approach of the coldest nights. Al-Hana, the brand, a curved line of stars that the author says looks like a mark burned into the sky, and its passage brings dust storms if the moon is full. You copy each name with the same respectful hand, your pen tracing the Arabic characters with a rhythm that matches the slow turning of the page in the source manuscript. The diagrams grow more complex as the mansions progress. Aldira, the forearm, a long chain of stars that you draw as a rippling line of dots, each one slightly offset from the next to suggest the curve of a limb. Al-Nathra, the gap, 2 stars separated by a visible space that the moon slips through like a thread through a needle's eye. You draw the gap as a deliberate space on the page, leaving the paper bare between the 2 dots, a tiny blank that speaks of the empty sky between the stars. The descriptions include weather signs, Al-Taf, the glance, associated with the first light rains that soften the ground, Al-Jabba, the forehead, known for the summer lightning that flickers on the horizon without thunder, Al-Zubra, the mane, linked to the hot, dry winds that carry dust from the north. The writing continues without interruption. The only sounds in the room, the scratch of the pen, the gentle hiss of the lamp, and the occasional creak of a roof beam. The light from the window has dimmed slightly, as a thicker cloud crosses the sun, and the shadows on the floor have faded almost to nothing, leaving the room in a state of uniform, pearly brightness. You glance up and see the cloud's edge, a silver-grey rim visible through the grille, and you watch it drift slowly eastward, its passage marked by the gradual return of the window's shadow onto the mat. The cloud moves on, the sun reappears, and the shadow sharpens again, a slow pulse of light and dark that has been repeating since the madrasa was built and will repeat long after you are gone. The mentions continue. Al-Safa, the changer, a star that marks the turning of the season from heat to coolness. Al-Awa, the barker, a group of stars that the author says resembles a dog baying at the moon, its rising associated with the first autumnal rains. You copy the diagram of Al-Awa, 4 dots in a diamond shape with a 5th dot beneath the dog's head, and you read the description aloud in a whisper, too soft to carry beyond the page, tasting the words on your tongue without giving them voice. Al-Simak, the unarmed, a single bright star that brings the promise of a good harvest if the moon passes it when full. Al-Ghafra, the covering, 3 faint stars that the author says are often hidden by haze, and their appearance signals the end of the rainy season. By the time you reach the 20th mansion, Al-Nam, the ostriches, a group of stars that the Bedouins saw as a flock of birds crossing the Milky Way, your hand has performed the same motion hundreds of times. Dip, write, blot, check, dip again. The page before you now holds a column of names and diagrams that runs nearly the full length of the text block, and you pause to count the entries remaining. 8 more mansions to go, then the closing paragraph on the moon's phases that ties the Manzil system to the lunar calendar. You flex your fingers, rotate your wrist, and continue. Al-Boulder, the town, a blank region of the sky with no bright stars, which the author calls a place of rest where the moon pauses in her journey. You draw no diagram for this mansion, leaving only a small circle of dots that represent the faintest stars visible only to the keenest eyes. And you copy the description, a mansion of stillness and calm, bringing days without wind and nights so quiet that a whispered word can carry across a valley. Al-Sad al-Tabi, the lucky one of the slaughterers, 2 stars that the author describes as a pair of hands raised in supplication for rain, and you draw the 2 dots with a small arc beneath them to suggest the cupped palms. Al-Sad Beulah, the swallower, a mansion of heavy, soaking rains that fill the dry riverbeds and bring the desert to life. You are writing the 25th mansion, Al-Sad al-Suud, the luckiest of the lucky, when the sound reaches you. It begins as a faint, distant thread of melody, so thin and far away that at first you mistake it for the wind humming through the window grill. You pause mid-stroke, the pen hovering above the paper, and you listen. The sound swells slightly, and you recognize it. The call to the midday prayer, the adhan, rising from the minaret of the main mosque. The voice of the muezzin is a clear, unhurried tenor that drifts across the rooftops of Timbuktu, and the melody follows the traditional makam, its notes rising and falling in a pattern that you have heard since childhood. The call carries no urgency, only a gentle invitation, and it mingles with the warm afternoon air and the smell of shea butter and ink. You set down the pen, placing it carefully on the practice sheet, with the nib angled away from your hand, and you straighten your posture on the mat. The prayer requires no special preparation beyond the washing you performed earlier in the day, and you simply turn to face the direction of Mecca, which you know by the angle of the eastern window and the position of the niche in the wall. You stand briefly, letting your legs stretch, then lower yourself into the first position of the prayer, the standing qiyam, your hands folded lightly over your chest. The movements flow from memory, each one following the last without thought. The bow, the prostration, the sitting, the prostration again, the words murmured half aloud with your lips moving against the quiet. The prayer lasts only a few minutes, a brief pause in the long afternoon, and when you finish, you touch your forehead once more to the mat and then rise, feeling the slight creak in your knees that comes from sitting too long in one position. You return to your seat beside the writing board, but before you pick up the pen, you reach for the small clay cup that rests near the niche. The cup holds water that you drew from the courtyard well this morning, and it has been sitting in the shade, still cool to the touch. Floating on its surface is a single mint leaf, fresh and green, which you plucked from the small pot that grows in a sunny corner of the courtyard. The mint has infused the water with a faint, clean fragrance that rises to your nostrils when you lift the cup, and you take a slow sip, letting the liquid rest in your mouth for a moment before swallowing. The mint tastes of coolness and clarity, and it washes away the slight dryness that the harmattan air had left in your throat. You hold the cup in both hands, warming its clay exterior with your palms, and you look out through the window grill at the courtyard below. A few scholars have gathered in the shade of the arcade, sitting on carpets and reading from open books, their white robes bright against the dark shadows. A boy with a leather bucket walks slowly across the sand, sprinkling water in a wide arc to settle the dust, and the dark spots he makes shrink and vanish as the dry earth drinks them up. The scene is still and small, a miniature of the daily life of the madrasah, and you watch it without any desire to join it, content in your high room with your lamp and your pages. You finish the mint water, leaving the leaf at the bottom of the cup, and you set the cup aside. The prayer and the water have refreshed something in you that was not tired but simply stilled, and you feel ready to return to the lunar mansions. You pick up the pen, dip it into the ink, and find your place on the page. The 25th mansion waits for its final words, and you write them without hurry. A mansion of great fortune, the author says, a time when the moon aligns with favorable stars and the world below receives her blessings in the form of gentle weather and abundant grazing. You continue through the last three mansions, Al-Farg al-Muqaddam, the forespout, which pours out the first light rains of the new season. Al-Farg al-Muqar, the rear spout, which follows with the heavier, more lasting rains. And finally, Batn al-Hut, the belly of the fish, a dim region near the tail of the great celestial fish, a mansion of hidden things and deep waters. Each diagram is drawn, each description copied, and when you write the final word of the 28th mansion, you place the small flower mark in the margin to signal the end of the section. The page is full, the ink is drying, and the afternoon light, now slanting from the west, paints a long golden rectangle on the wall above your head, a gentle announcement that the day has begun its slow descent toward evening. The last of the lunar mansions lies drying beneath the lamp, its ink already faded from glossy black to a settled matte, and you become aware of a stiffness that has crept into your body without announcement. It is not pain, but a quiet, insistent reminder that you have been sitting in the same posture for hours. Your legs crossed beneath you on the palm frond mat, your spine held straight but no longer easy. Your fingers, too, carry a faint ache in the joints, a memory of the thousands of small strokes they have performed since the morning. You set the pen down carefully across the inkwell and stretch both hands open above your knees, spreading the fingers wide and holding them there until the ache fades to a mild warmth. You rotate your wrists in slow circles, feeling the small clicks and releases of tendons settling back into place, and you decide that a pause a proper pause, not the brief interruptions for lamp tending which serve both the work and the worker. You rise from the mat with the deliberation of someone whose body has forgotten its own weight, placing one hand on the writing board to steady yourself as your legs unfold and the blood returns to your feet in a prickling rush. The sensation passes quickly, and you stand upright in the small room, your head nearly reaching the timber beam that crosses the ceiling, and you notice that the air near the ceiling is noticeably warmer than the air near the floor, a stratification that you have observed many times but never thought to name. You smooth your tunic, where the fabric has creased across your knees, and you take a step toward the door, your sandals making a soft scuff against the mat. The door, which has been ajar all morning, swings open fully with a light push, and you step out onto the covered gallery that overlooks the madrasa courtyard. The transition from the small lamplit room to the open gallery is a gentle shock. The air here moves freely, carrying the dry, dusty scent of sun-heated sand and the faint, clean tang of the water that has been sprinkled below. The gallery is a shaded colonnade of pillars and arches, its floor paved with worn bricks that have hollowed slightly in the center from the passage of centuries of feet. You walk slowly along it, your hand brushing the top of the low balustrade, and the rough plaster feels warm under your palm, still holding the morning's heat. The courtyard below spreads out in its noon quietude, a broad rectangle of pale sand that shimmers faintly where the sun strikes it directly. A single, large tamarind tree grows near the center, its trunk twisted and ancient, its branches spreading into a dense canopy of tiny leaves that cast a circle of deep shade onto the sand. The tree is older than the madrasa itself, or so the scholars say, a holdover from an earlier time when this land was open ground, and the city walls had not yet reached this quarter. You pause at the balustrade and look down at the tree, watching the way a breeze you cannot feel in the gallery, but can observe in the motion of the leaves stirs the tiny leaflets so that they ripple like the surface of a pond, silver green and grey-green in alternating waves. A few scholars sit in the tree's shade, their white robes bright against the dark sand, their heads bent over books or inclined toward one another in quiet conversation. None of them look up at you, and you do not call down to them. The madrasa respects solitude as a form of prayer, and a scribe on a pause is left to his own quiet. Near the far arcade, a young boy, perhaps a student's son or an orphan given shelter by the mosque, walks slowly across the courtyard carrying a leather bucket, his small figure casting a long, thin shadow that stretches ahead of him on the sand. He stops every few paces, dips a wooden ladle into the bucket, and flings water in a wide arc, the spray sparkling for an instant in the sun, before it soaks into the sand and darkens it to a rich brown. The dark patches last only moments before the heat drinks them away, and the boy continues his circuit, a ritual of cooling that will be repeated many times before sunset. You follow the gallery with slow steps, passing the doors of other manuscript rooms, each one closed, each one bearing its small carved symbol above the lintel. One door shows a stylized astrolabe indicating a room of instruments and observational tools. Another bears the image of an open book with rays emanating from its pages, the sign of a room devoted to prophetic traditions. You pause at this door and listen, but you hear nothing from within. Only the deep silence of a room that is either empty or occupied by someone as quiet as yourself. You move on, your sandals whispering across the brick floor, and you reach the top of the staircase that descends to the courtyard level. The stairs are narrow and worn, their edges rounded like old soap, and you descend them slowly, one hand trailing along the wall where the plaster has been polished to a sheen by countless similar descents. The wall is cool against your fingers, cooler than the gallery wall, and the coolness tells you that the lower level of the madrasa retains the night's temperature longer than the upper rooms, a gift of the thick mud brick construction that the builders of Timbuktu mastered long ago. At the bottom of the stairs you step into a small vestibule where a stone bench runs along one wall, and there, seated on the bench with a large wooden board across his knees, is the librarian. The librarian is a man of middle years, his beard streaked with grey, his eyes soft and slightly hooded from a lifetime of reading in dim rooms. He wears a simple dark blue robe, and a string of wooden prayer beads hangs loosely around his left wrist, the beads clicking softly whenever he moves his hand. His board supports a stack of loose folios, pages that have been removed from their bindings for repair or recataloguing, and he is sorting them into order, lifting each page with the reverence one might give a sleeping infant. He looks up as you approach, and his face creases into a smile that is both welcoming and entirely silent. He knows that the scribes who descend from the upper rooms during their pauses are not seeking conversation, only a moment of different air. You exchange a small nod, and he gestures with his chin toward the far corner of the vestibule, where a small charcoal brazier glows on a low iron stand. Beside the brazier, a copper kettle sits on a folded cloth, and next to it, a tray holds several small glass cups and a tin canister of green tea. The librarian prepares tea for anyone who passes through, a quiet act of hospitality that he performs without ostentation, and you accept the invitation by walking toward the brazier and settling yourself onto the low wooden stool that stands beside it. The brazier's coals are few and well spent, glowing a deep, steady red beneath a fine layer of white ash that breathes with each small current of air. The kettle on the cloth is warm, not hot, its contents having been boiled earlier and now kept at a temperature suitable for drinking without scalding. You watch as the librarian sets aside his board, rises, and comes to stand beside the brazier, his movements unhurried and precise. He lifts the tin canister and removes its lid, releasing the faint grassy scent of dried tea leaves from a faraway green mountain you will never see. With a small copper spoon he scoops a measure of leaves into each glass cup. The leaves are dull olive color, curled and fragrant. He pours the water from the kettle into the first cup, a thin stream that darkens immediately upon touching the leaves, and the scent that rises is clean and slightly sweet, a smell that belongs equally to distant caravan routes and the quiet corners of libraries. He repeats the pour for your cup, and then for his own, and he hands you the glass with both hands, a gesture of respect that you return by receiving it the same way. The glass is small, no larger than an egg, and its surface is warm through its thin walls. You hold it near your face and let the steam touch your chin before you take the first sip. The tea tastes of green things and patience. It is not sweetened because the librarian follows the old style that prizes the natural bitterness of the leaf, and you let the flavor spread across your tongue without hurrying toward a second sip. A stillness settles around the brazier, the kind of stillness that arises when two people share a drink without needing to fill the air with words. The librarian returns to his bench and his folios, and you remain on the stool, cradling the warm glass in your palm and looking out through the vestibule's open arch into the courtyard. The tamarind tree sways gently, its movement almost too slow to notice, a shift in the light and shadow rather than a motion of branches. The boy with the bucket has disappeared into some other corner of the madrasah, and the scholars under the tree have been joined by a third, a young man who carries a bound manuscript and reads aloud in a low murmur that carries across the sand as a sound without distinct words, a human hum that blends with the rustle of the leaves. You watch the scene as you might watch a painting, without any impulse to enter it or change it, and your mind drifts to the work you left upstairs. The lunar mansions are complete, a full page of names and diagrams that carries the knowledge of the desert Arabs into the library of the madrasah. After this pause, you will return to the room and begin the next section of the manuscript, which you know concerns the diagrams of the celestial sphere and the explanation of the ecliptic. The work will require the compass and the fine pen and a steady hand for drawing curves, and the tea you are drinking now will steady you in ways that go beyond the physical. You take another sip, and the warmth spreads down your throat and into your chest, a gentle counterpoint to the dry air. The librarian finishes sorting his folios and stands to place them in a wooden cabinet that stands against the vestibule wall. The cabinet's doors are carved with an intricate pattern of intersecting circles, a geometric design that repeats into infinity, and you let your eyes trace the lines as he closes the doors and slides the brass bolt into place. The sound of the bolt is a satisfying clunk, solid and final, and the librarian turns to you with another small smile, then sits back on his bench and takes up his prayer beads, the beads clicking in a slow rhythmic cycle that matches the pace of your breathing. You finish the tea, leaving only a few dark leaves at the bottom of the glass, and you set the glass on the tray beside the brazier. Rising from the stool, You feel the difference the pause has made. The stiffness in your legs is gone. The ache in your fingers has faded to a distant memory, and your eyes, which had begun to feel the strain of the lamplight, are rested and clear. You nod once more to the librarian, who dips his head in return, and you walk toward the staircase with the same slow, deliberate pace you used to descend, your body now refreshed and ready for the hours of copying that remain. Before you climb the stairs, you notice a small copper basin set into a niche at the base of the stairwell, a basin filled with clean water and a folded linen cloth resting on its rim. The basin is for the scholars and scribes to wash their hands before handling manuscripts, and you decide to use it now, to rinse away the faint stickiness of the tea and any dust that has settled on your skin since you left your room. You dip your hands into the water, which is cool and soft, and you rub your palms together gently, then lift a handful and let it run over your wrists. The water drips back into the basin with a quiet, musical sound, and you dry your hands on the linen cloth, which smells faintly of sun and air. You climb the stairs slowly, your hand once again on the cool wall, and you emerge into the upper gallery just as a cloud passes over the courtyard, dimming the light for a few seconds and then releasing it. The gallery is empty, the doors still closed, and the only sound is the distant murmur of the recitation hall and the soft cooing of pigeons that have returned to their ledge. You walk back to your door, the third from the stairhead, and you pause at the threshold, placing your fingertips on the carved star on the lintel. The wood is warm and smooth, and the gesture is not a prayer or a superstition, but a small act of reconnection, a physical acknowledgement that you are crossing back into the space where the work resides. You push the door open and step inside. The room welcomes you with the familiar scent of shea butter and ink and old paper, and the lamp burns on as you left it, its flame small and steady above the bowl. The writing board waits with its pages neatly arranged, the source manuscript open to the section on the celestial sphere, and the whole scene is so unchanged that your pause feels almost like a dream, a brief departure that has left no mark. You close the door behind you, leaving it open a crack as before, and you walk to the writing board, lowering yourself onto the mat with the ease of a body that has remembered how to sit. You pick up the pen, dip it, and wait for the afternoon to carry you forward into the next portion of the text. The afternoon has slipped away while you rested, the sun now dropping toward the western rim of the sky, and the room wears a different character than it did when you descended the stairs. The light that enters through the window grill has softened from white gold to a deep amber, the color of honey held up before a flame, and it no longer falls directly on the writing board, but stretches across the far wall in a slanting panel that climbs slowly upward as the sun descends. The shadows in the corners of the room have thickened from pale grey to a dense charcoal, and the lamp, which throughout the day played a supporting role to the sun, now begins its reign as the primary source of illumination. Its flame, still steady from the tending you gave it earlier, glows with a new prominence, painting the walls with a warm, wavering wash that the cooler daylight can no longer compete with. You settle onto the mat and take stock of the work ahead. The source manuscript lies open to the section that follows the lunar mansions, a section titled On the Configuration of the Celestial Sphere, in the same red ink that marked the earlier headings. This portion of the text contains no tables of numbers and no lists of star names, but instead consists of a series of geometric diagrams accompanied by explanatory paragraphs, the kind of material that requires the compass and the ruler and a hand that can draw a perfect circle in a single motion. The author intends to show the reader how the celestial sphere is divided by the great circles, the equator, the ecliptic, the tropics, the collars, and how these divisions relate to the daily rotation of the heavens. You have copied similar diagrams before in other manuscripts, and you know that the work will be delicate and absorbing, the sort of task that stills the mind even more completely than the copying of text. You begin by preparing the tools that the diagrams will require. From the niche you retrieve the compass, an instrument of polished brass with two slender legs joined at the top by a small hinge, one leg ending in a sharp steel point and the other fitted with a hollow tube that holds a piece of red ink pigment. The red ink, made from the same ground cinnabar you used for the Mars retrogression dot, has been pressed into the tube and will need to be moistened slightly before it will flow. You unscrew the tube, add a single drop of water from the copper flask, and work the pigment with a small wire until it reaches the consistency of thin paste. You then reassemble the compass and test the point on a scrap of paper, drawing a small arc that comes out crisp and even, the red a vivid contrast against the cream page. Satisfied, you set the compass on the cloth beside the board and turn your attention to the other tools: the ebony ruler, the blunt stylus for guidelines, the fine pen for labels, and a small square of soft leather that you will use to erase any stray graphite or stylus marks once the ink has dried. The window's amber light has dimmed further, and you realize that you have been working in a kind of transitional gloom, the daylight falling away faster than you expected. You pause and turn to the lamp, which is still burning with its small, steady flame, and you decide to adjust the wick to raise the light level for the precise work ahead. Taking the brass snuffers, you trim away another small piece of the charred tip, and then, instead of pressing the wick down as you would to dim it, you coax it slightly higher with the tip of the spatula, raising the flame by perhaps a grain of rice. The flame responds by lengthening and brightening, its colors shifting to a paler, more golden yellow, and the circle of light on the writing board expands to cover the full width of the paper. The lamp's glow now dominates the room, and the last remnants of daylight seem to retreat before it, gathering in the window arch like a shy guest, uncertain whether to stay. You turn back to the source manuscript and study the first diagram the author presents, a large circle representing the celestial sphere with a horizontal diameter labeled the equator and a tilted diameter labeled the ecliptic, the two lines intersecting at a small angle that the author notes is approximately 24 degrees. Within the circle, smaller arcs mark the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and outside it, a ring of text gives the names of the zodiacal constellations in their proper order. The diagram is ambitious, requiring multiple concentric elements and a steady hand for the labeling, and you decide to place it on a fresh sheet of paper, centered within the text block, leaving space for the explanatory paragraphs above and below. You secure the fresh sheet under the silk cords and begin by establishing the center point of the diagram. Using the ruler, you measure the exact midpoint of the text block, both horizontally and vertically, and you mark it with a tiny dot of black ink made with the very tip of the fine pen. This dot will be the anchor for the compass, and you position the compass's steel point over it with the care of a surveyor setting a boundary stone. When the point is seated in the paper, you press down gently with your left hand on the compass's hinge and rotate the instrument through a full circle with your right hand, the red ink tube leaving a clean, continuous line that meets itself without overlap. The result is a perfect circle, roughly the size of your palm, its outline a deep rust red against the cream paper, and you release the compass and examine it for any wavering or thin spots. There are none. The next step is the inner circles, which represent the tropics. You adjust the compass to a slightly smaller radius, testing the distance against the source diagram with a piece of thread that you knot at the appropriate length, and you draw the first tropic, a thinner red line that runs parallel to the outer circle and lies just inside its upper portion. The second tropic mirrors it below, and you draw that one as well, the two lines symmetrical. The compass leaves behind a small dimple at the center point, where the steel tip has pressed into the paper, and you will cover this later with the label for the Earth, a tiny circle with a dot at its heart that signifies the terrestrial sphere. Now, the diameters. You take up the ebony ruler and the fine pen, this time loaded with black ink rather than red, because the author uses black for the equatorial and ecliptic lines. You align the ruler horizontally through the center point, checking its level against the guidelines you scored earlier, and you draw a thin, straight line from the left edge of the outer circle to the right edge, a trajectory that cuts the sphere exactly in half. This is the equator, and you label it immediately at its right-hand endpoint with the word Muad'Dil al-Nahar in a miniature script that you write with the pen held nearly vertical, the letters compact and precise. The ecliptic requires a different angle, tilted upward at roughly 24 degrees from the horizontal. The source diagram shows the ecliptic crossing the equator at 2 points, the equinoxes, and reaching its highest and lowest points at the solstices, and you must reproduce this tilt with care, because the entire structure of the celestial coordinate system depends upon it. You mark the 2 intersection points on the outer circle with tiny dots, measuring their positions by eye against the source and then checking the measurement with a scrap of thread. And then you draw the ecliptic as a straight line passing through both dots and continuing beyond the circle's boundaries on either side. The line slants upward to the right, a trajectory that represents the path of the sun through the zodiac, and where it touches the tropics, you draw small arcs to indicate the solstices, the boundaries beyond which the sun never travels. With the main lines in place, you return to the compass for the final element of the diagram, the colas, the great circles that pass through the celestial poles and the equinoctial and solstitial points. These are drawn as dotted arcs rather than solid lines, and you achieve the dotted effect by lifting the compass point in a rapid, rhythmic motion as you rotate it, creating a series of tiny red dashes that arc across the sphere from pole to pole. The colas are not strictly necessary for the author's explanation, but he includes them for completeness, and you honor his thoroughness by rendering them with the same exactitude you gave to the tropics. The diagram is now complete in its geometry, but it remains unlabeled except for the equator. You take up the fine pen and the black ink and begin the patient work of adding the names to each element. The Tropic of Cancer you label as Madar al-Saratan and the Tropic of Capricorn as Madar al-Jadi, writing the words in a tight arc that follows the curve of each line. The ecliptic receives its label at the upper right, Falak al-Baruj, the circle of the zodiacal signs, and the intersection points are marked as the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox in a script so small that a casual reader might miss them entirely. The poles, which you have not yet drawn, require small asterisks at the top and bottom of the sphere, and you add the labels al-Kutaib al-Shamali and al-Kutaib al-Janubi beside them, the northern and southern poles of the celestial globe. You set down the pen and rotate the page to examine the diagram from all angles. The red and black lines contrast sharply against the cream paper. The circles are true, the labels are legible, and the whole composition has the quiet elegance of a well-proportioned instrument. The lamp's flame, which has been burning higher and brighter since you raised the wick, catches the glossy surface of the red ink and makes it gleam like polished garnet. You let out a slow breath and realize that you had been holding some portion of your attention in a tight knot while drawing the circles, and the knot now loosens, spreading a feeling of ease through your shoulders and chest. The explanatory text that accompanies the diagram waits to be copied, and you turn your attention back to the source manuscript. The author begins by explaining that the celestial sphere is an imaginary construct, a vast hollow globe centered on the Earth, upon whose inner surface the stars are fixed like jewels. The rotation of this sphere around an axis that runs from pole to pole explains the daily rising and setting of the stars, and the tilt of this axis relative to the ecliptic explains the changing seasons. You copy these words with a flowing hand, the pen moving easily after the minute precision of the diagram, and the sentences accumulate on the page in neat, regular lines that frame the diagram above and below. The author then discusses the precession of the equinoxes, the slow drift of the equinoctial points along the ecliptic that causes the seasons to shift against the background of the fixed stars over the course of thousands of years. You remember copying the passage about precession earlier in the day, but here the author returns to it with greater technical detail, explaining that the rate of precession is approximately 1 degree per century and that the entire cycle will take 36,000 years to complete. You write the numbers carefully, the 3 and the 6, and the long string of zeros that follows the latter figure, and you note that the author adds a small annotation expressing wonder at the slowness of the motion, a celestial pace that makes a human lifetime seem as brief as a spark from a flint. The room has grown fully dark beyond the lamp's circle of light, a deep blackness that presses against the windows and fills the corners with an almost solid opacity. When you glance at the grille, you see that the sky beyond it has shifted from amber to a deep indigo, and a few of the brightest stars have already appeared, pinpricks of cold silver that you recognize from the diagrams you're copying. The madrasah outside your door has fallen silent, the voices of the scholars and students replaced by a dense quiet that absorbs all sound. The pigeons have gone to roost, and the only noise now is the soft, continuous hiss of the lamp, the scratch of your pen, and the occasional creak of a roof beam settling as the night coolness begins to draw in. You pause in your writing to adjust the lamp again, because the higher flame has consumed the butter more quickly than you anticipated. You scoop another dollop of Shea butter from the reserve gourd, which is now markedly lighter than it was this morning, and you add it to the bowl, stirring it gently with the spatula until it melts into the golden liquid. The wick you leave as it is, burning tall and bright, because the fine work of labeling the diagram requires as much light as you can provide. The fresh butter releases its nutty scent into the still air, and the small ritual of tending the flame refreshes your attention as effectively as the tea and the pause earlier in the day. You return to the source manuscript and find that the author follows the celestial sphere diagram with a second, related diagram, a projection of the sphere onto a flat plane, showing the zodiacal belt as a strip divided into 12 equal segments, each one marked with the name and symbol of the corresponding sign. This diagram will be simpler than the first, a rectangle rather than a circle, and you prepare to draw it with the ebony ruler and the fine pen, marking out the 12 divisions with vertical lines and filling each compartment with its label in a script that mirrors the source. The work is repetitive but undemanding, a return to the slow rhythm of ruled lines and careful spacing that dominated the morning's tables, and you settle into it with the calm of a boat finding a current it has traveled before. Outside, the darkness grows deeper, and the stars multiply in the gap of sky visible through the window grille. You work on, the lamp your only sun now, the yellow flame reflected faintly in the brass fittings of the writing board and in the glossy surface of the ink as it dries. The night wraps around the madrasah like a blanket, and inside your small room, the scribe and the lamp continue their slow, shared labor, the one writing, the other burning, both consuming their fuel at exactly the rate required. The night has sealed itself around the madrasah like the wax seal on a letter, complete and unbroken. The window grille, which all day framed a changing canvas of sky and cloud and pigeon wing, now shows only a deep, featureless darkness, punctuated by stars, so many stars, more than you could count in a lifetime, each one a steady, unwinking point of light that has travelled across the void for years beyond numbering, only to arrive at this small square of carved wood and find you waiting. The lamp on its brass stand is the sole source of light in the room now, and it burns with a calm authority, its flame tall and golden, its circle of illumination a warm island in a sea of shadow. The air has cooled considerably since sunset, and you have pulled your cloak tight around your shoulders, the wool trapping a layer of warmth against your body while your hands remain bare and nimble for the pen. You have reached the section of the source manuscript that draws most heavily upon the work of Al-Sufi, the astronomer from Rai who, nearly 6 centuries before your birth, compiled the Book of Fixed Stars, a catalogue that corrected and expanded the ancient star tables of Ptolemy. The author of your manuscript, writing in the century after Al-Sufi, has incorporated his descriptions and magnitudes verbatim, adding only a few marginal notes of his own, and the pages before you are rich with constellation after constellation, each one presented with a small ink sketch of the star pattern, a table of coordinates, and a brief descriptive passage that notes the colors and brightnesses of the principal stars. The script here is slightly smaller than in the earlier sections to accommodate the density of information, and the diagrams are drawn with a remarkably steady hand, the stars represented by tiny circles of varying sizes according to their magnitude. You turn the source to the first constellation of this section, Andromeda, the Chained Woman. The diagram shows a graceful figure composed of bright points connected by faint dotted lines, her arms extended as though bound, her head marked by a prominent star, her body trailing downward to a chain of fainter lights. The text beside the diagram identifies the bright star in the head as Sirah, a star of the second magnitude that the author notes shares its light with the constellation Pegasus, forming the northeast corner of the Great Square. You dip the pen. The ink has thickened slightly in the cool air, and you stir it with the nib before drawing, and you begin to copy the entry onto your fresh page. You write the name first, Al-Mara al-Musalazar, the Chained Woman, forming the Arabic letters with the same deliberate care you have used all day, the Aleph tall and straight, the Mim a small closed loop, the Ra a descending curve. Beneath the name you sketch the star pattern, not by copying the source slavishly, but by measuring the relative positions of the bright points with your eye and placing each dot on the page where it belongs. The head star you make larger than the others, a full round ink drop applied with a single touch of the nib. The arms you indicate with a series of smaller dots connected by the faintest of pencil-like strokes, which you will not ink over but will leave as a spirit line to guide a reader's eye. The feet and the chain require only 3 dim stars each, and you place them with the fine pen, the dots so small they could be mistaken for specks of dust if you did not know to look for them. The descriptive passage follows the diagram, and you copy it word for word. The author notes that the star in Andromeda's head is of a clear white color, while the star in her right shoulder, which Al-Sufi records as magnitude 3, has a slight yellowish tinge. The star in her left foot is shared with the constellation Perseus, a point of connection between two celestial figures that the ancient Greeks imagined as hero and rescued princess. You write these details with a steady flow, the sentences accumulating on the page, and you note with a small inward pleasure the way the author's language becomes more visual here, more concerned with color and brightness than with the dry geometry of the spheres. It is as if he, too, felt the lure of the stars as actual lights rather than mathematical points, the same lure that draws your own eyes to the window on clear nights. When the Andromeda entry is complete, you place a small separating mark in the margin and move to the next constellation, Perseus, the hero, who holds the head of the Gorgon. The source diagram shows a more complex figure than Andromeda, with a bent arm raising a sword and the other hand gripping the Gorgon's head, which is marked by the star Algol. You know Algol by reputation as well as by sight. It is a variable star, a star that dims and brightens in a regular pattern, and Al-Sufi was the first astronomer to note its variability explicitly in writing. The author of your manuscript includes this observation as a special line, set apart from the main description, and you copy it now with a fine pen and a slightly smaller script, recording that the star called Algol the Demon changes its brightness over a period of 3 days, a phenomenon that the author attributes to the will of the Creator, who made the heavens to display signs for the observant. You sketch the Perseus diagram with the same methodical approach you used for Andromeda, placing the bright star Mirfak at the figure's right shoulder and drawing it as a large dot, while Algol, at the head of the Gorgon, you draw as 2 concentric circles, a small inner dot and a faint outer ring to indicate its variability. The sword arm you show as a line of 3 stars, the blade a single bright point, and the legs you spread in a running pose across the page. The diagram is no larger than your thumb, but within it you have enclosed the entire mythic action of the hero, and you look at it for a moment before returning to the text, satisfied that a future reader will see what you saw in the source. The descriptions continue, and your pen moves across the page with a rhythm that has now become as natural as breathing. Cassiopeia, the seated queen, appears next, her stars arranged in a distinctive W shape that the author says resembles a throne. You copy the names of the 5 bright stars that form the pattern, noting their varied colors. The star at the top of the W is a pure white, while the star at the bottom left has a faintly golden cast. The author includes a small anecdote, borrowed from Al-Sufi, about a Bedouin who used Cassiopeia to navigate the desert by night, calling the constellation Aldat al-Kursi, the Lady of the Chair, and you transcribe the anecdote in the margin, adding a small asterisk to link it to the main text. Then Cepheus, the king, a sprawling constellation of dim stars that the author admits is difficult to trace without a clear night and a patient eye. You draw its pattern as a loose triangle of middling stars with a chain of faint points trailing downward, and you copy the author's comment that Cepheus contains no stars brighter than the 3rd magnitude, making it a test of the observer's skill. The lamp flickers once as you write this, a brief flutter that causes the flame to lean and then straighten, and you look up automatically, check the butter level in the bowl, and find it still sufficient. You return to the page, the interruption already forgotten. The constellations accumulate, Auriga, the Charioteer, with the bright star Capella marked in the source as a brilliant, yellowish white, one of the brightest in the entire sky. Triangulum, the triangle, a simple geometric shape of 3 stars that the author uses to illustrate the principle of measuring angular distances between celestial points. And then the zodiacal constellations that the eclipse passes through, each one described with its associated lunar mentions as a cross-reference to the earlier section. You copy Aries, the ram, noting the 2 bright stars of its horns that correspond to the first lunar mansion Al-Sharatan. Taurus, the bull, with the red star Aldebaran blazing in its eye, a star that the author says is the color of a dying ember and that you remember copying among the lunar mansions earlier in the day. Gemini, the twins, the 2 brightest stars, nearly equal in magnitude, and both a clear, steady white. The night deepens around you, and the silence of the madrasa becomes so complete that you can hear the sound of your own pen nib dragging across the paper in a way that you did not notice during the busier hours of the day. The scratch is soft and rhythmic, a sound like the brushing of a dune grass in a breeze, too light to feel, and it merges with the continuous low hiss of the lamp and the occasional settling creak of a roof beam overhead. Outside the window, the stars that you are copying have wheeled slightly in their courses. The constellation Andromeda now just visible at the edge of the grille where earlier it was not, and the movement is so slow that you perceive it not as motion, but as a subtle shift in the arrangement of the lights, as if the sky itself has turned a page. Your hand continues its work, and the pages of your copy grow thick with star diagrams and coordinate tables. You copy Orion, the hunter, with its 3 belt stars perfectly aligned, their spacing so equal that the author marvels at the precision of the creator's placement. You draw the belt as 3 evenly spaced dots and add the bright stars of the shoulders and knees, Betelgeuse and Rigel, noting Betelgeuse's reddish hue and Rigel's blue-white brilliance. You copy Canis Major, the great dog, with Sirius blazing at its mouth, the brightest star in the entire firmament, which the author describes as a star of such piercing whiteness that it seems to tremble when the air is unsteady. The description of Sirius runs to several lines, and you transcribe them all, the words flowing from your pen as smoothly as water from a tilted jug. The small ink sketches that accompany each constellation have become by this point in the night a language of their own, a series of dots and connecting lines that you read as easily as you read the Arabic text. Your eye measures the distances between stars with an accuracy born of practice, and your hand places each dot where your eye tells it to go, the spatial translation from source to copy, happening almost without conscious thought. The lamp's light falls across the growing collection of constellations, and the tiny diagrams seem, in the flickering glow, to possess a faint life of their own, a miniature sky spread out on the paper before you. You come at last to a longer passage that the author has drawn directly from Al-Sufi's introduction, a reflection on the purpose of naming and mapping the stars. The passage speaks of the stars as guides for travelers and as signs for the wise, and it praises the ancients who first traced the figures in the random scatter of lights, giving order to the apparent chaos. You copy this passage with particular care because the author's tone here is more philosophical than technical, and the words deserve a hand that respects their weight. The sentences are longer and more complex than the earlier constellation descriptions, and you write them slowly, pausing after each clause to verify the grammar against the source, the pen lifting and dipping in a measured cadence. When the passage ends, you place the small flower mark in the margin to indicate the close of the section, and you set down the pen. The page before you is dense with writing, the text framed by a border of diagrams that encircle it like a wreath of stars. The ink is drying, the wet gloss slowly yielding to matte black, and the whole composition has the quiet authority of a thing well made. You flex your fingers, which have grown cool despite the lamp's warmth, and you hold them above the flame for a moment, not close enough to burn, just close enough to feel the heat soak into the joints. The warmth spreads upward into your hands and wrists, and you let out a breath that you did not realize you were holding. You listen to the silence of the night, a silence so deep that it seems to have a texture, a weight that presses gently against your ears. Somewhere in the city a dog barks once and then is still, the sound muffled by walls and distance until it arrives as a soft, rounded thump rather than a sharp noise. A moment later, the call of the night prayer rises from the mosque, a single voice singing into the darkness, and you pause to listen, the melody weaving through the still air with the same patient beauty it has carried for centuries. The voice fades, and the silence returns, deeper than before, as if the prayer has taken all sound with it into the sky. You look down at the pages you have filled, the tidy rows of Arabic letters and the careful star diagrams, and you feel a quiet companionship with them, as if the ink on the paper is a presence in the room, rather than a mere mark. The constellations you have copied: Andromeda, Perseus, Cassiopeia, Orion, Sirius are the same constellations that shine on the city outside your window, and the thought connects the two realms, the written and the real, into a single fabric of light and learning. You feel no loneliness, no fatigue of the spirit, only the deep contentment of a mind that has been fully and peacefully occupied for hours, and you fold your hands in your lap and sit for a while, breathing with the lamp, waiting for the impulse to begin the final pages of the night's work to rise and carry you forward. The night is grown as deep as it will before the first hint of dawn begins its slow return, and the lamp has become the room's sole anchor, a small golden sun in a universe scaled to the size of a writing board. You have been copying for more hours than you can easily count, and the source manuscript has guided you through the spheres, the tables of motion, the lunar mansions, the diagrams of the celestial globe, and the long catalogue of fixed stars. Now only a single folio remains in the portion you assigned yourself for this day, a short passage that the author places at the end of the constellation section, a quiet reflection on the Milky Way, the great band of nebulous light that circles the sky and that the Bedouin call the straw path of the celestial herd. You turn the source to the last page you will copy tonight, and the paper feels thinner here at the end of the section, its edge slightly frayed from the touch of previous hands. The page contains no diagrams, only a single block of text written in the author's most careful script, and the subject is the Milky Way itself, described not as a constellation, but as a phenomenon that spans the entire sphere of fixed stars. The author notes that the ancients debated the nature of this luminous band, some saying it was the remnant of a former sun, others that it was a gathering of stars too numerous and faint to be distinguished individually. The author himself inclines toward the latter view, citing the testimony of astronomers who observed the Milky Way through a tube that blocked extraneous light, and reported seeing countless tiny stars packed close together. You find the word for tube in the text, an early reference to what later astronomers will call a viewing cylinder, and you copy it with a subtle lift of the eyebrow, a small acknowledgement of the cleverness of those who came before. You dip the pen, settling into the final passage with the same patience you have maintained since morning. The opening line describes the Milky Way as a great circle inclined to the celestial equator, its northern portion passing through Cassiopeia and Auriga and Perseus, its southern portion trailing through the constellations of the Ship and the Centaur, regions of the sky that you have never seen because they lie below the horizon of Timbuktu. The author admits this limitation openly, noting that he relies on the reports of travelers who have journeyed to the lands of the south and described the stars there with wonder. You copy the admission with a steady hand, finding no shame in the limits of knowledge, only the quiet honesty of a scholar who knows that the sky is larger than any single lifetime. The text continues with a description of the dark rifts that divide the Milky Way, the patches of emptiness that the Bedouin call the black camps, places where no stars shine and the sky reveals its deepest black. The author speculates that these rifts are not absences but obscurations, clouds of unseen matter that block the light of the stars behind them, and you write the Arabic word for obscurations with a slight pause, the concept being nearly unique in the astronomical literature of your time. The word is composed of letters that suggest concealment and shadow, and you form them on the page as carefully as you have formed every other letter tonight, the ink flowing in a thin, sure line. The passage then turns to the Milky Way's motion, explaining that it shares the daily rotation of the fixed stars and that its position relative to the horizon changes with the seasons. In the winter months, the author notes, the brightest portion of the Milky Way passes overhead, a river of light that stretches from horizon to horizon, and caravans traveling by night use it as a guide when the moon is dark. You copy this practical detail with a nod, because you have heard the caravan masters speak of the Milky Way as a road map, a celestial highway that points the way to the salt mines of the north and the gold fields of the south. The connection between the learned astronomy of the Madrasah and the living knowledge of the desert traders is a thread that runs through many manuscripts, and you weave it into your copy without comment. The final paragraph of the passage is a short meditation on the beauty of the Milky Way, a rare moment of pure reflection in a text that has been mostly technical. The author writes that on a clear night, when the moon is absent and the air is dry, the Milky Way appears as a veil of pearl dust scattered across the sky, and the heart of the observer is moved to wonder by the sight. He adds that this wonder is a form of worship, that the study of the heavens is a path to understanding the order of creation, and that every star, every nebula, every dark rift speaks silently of the one who set them in place. You copy these final words with particular care, the pen moving slowly, the letters forming with a grace that you reserve for the most meaningful passages. The ink on the last sentence dries before your eyes, the glossy surface fading to matte black, and you set down the pen with the quiet finality of a door closing without sound. You sit for a moment, both hands resting on the edges of the writing board, and you look at the page before you. It is full, every line occupied, every margin annotated, the final block of text aligned with the borders you drew so many hours ago. The Milky Way passage has brought the day's copying to a natural close, and the small flower mark in the margin signals the end of this portion of the manuscript. You breathe out, a long, slow exhale that carries with it the accumulated stillness of the entire day, and you feel the tiredness in your body not as a burden, but as a quiet companion, the honest fatigue of work completed. Now comes the time for closing, the small rituals that separate the labor of copying from the rest that follows. You lift the river stone from the source manuscript and set it aside, then close the old book with both hands, pressing the pages gently together so that they align without buckling. The leather tie, with its small bone crescent, wraps around the cover, and you tuck the toggle into place with a soft click. You place the manuscript in its cloth wrapper, folding the cotton over it twice, and you set it at the back of the writing board where it will wait for tomorrow's session. The manuscript will be there when you return, its pages holding the stars you have copied and the stars you have yet to copy, patient and unchanged. You lift your own copied folios, the stack of pages that did not exist this morning and now contain several thousand words and dozens of diagrams. You align the edges, tapping the stack gently against the board until the pages form a clean rectangle, and you check the order of the sheets to ensure that the celestial sphere diagram follows the planetary tables, that the Andromeda constellation comes before Cassiopeia, that the Milky Way passage sits at the end where it belongs. Everything is in its proper sequence, and you wrap the copied folios in a clean cotton cloth that you keep in the niche for this purpose, tying the bundle with a simple cord that loops twice around and knots with a single pull. The niche receives the bundle, and you place it next to the reserve gourd and the spare reeds and the small box of sand, arranging them so that nothing rolls or shifts. The niche is shallow but wide, and it holds the day's work alongside the tools that made it possible, a small archive within the larger archive of the madrasah. You close the wooden shutter that covers the niche, a simple panel of cedar fitted into a groove, and you slide it shut with a soft, dry sound, the wood rubbing against wood in a brief whisper that marks the end of the active portion of your day. The lamp still burns on the brass stand, its flame now slightly shorter than it was an hour ago, the butter level in the bowl lowered by the long night's consumption. You do not add more fuel, because the lamp's work is done, and yours is nearly so. You sit before the flame and watch it for a moment, this small fire that has accompanied you through every stroke of the pen, every numbered table, every careful diagram. The flame has witnessed the entire creation of the day's folios, and it has burned with the same steady devotion you have tried to bring to the copying, asking for nothing but a little butter and a trimmed wick. You lean forward until your face is close to the flame, close enough to feel its warmth on your cheeks and chin, and you purse your lips. The breath you release is soft and controlled, a gentle stream of air that strikes the flame just below its brightest point. The flame leans, struggles for a fraction of a heartbeat, and then goes out, vanishing into a thin, curling wisp of smoke that rises from the glowing tip of the wick. The smoke carries the scent of shea butter and burnt cotton, a smell that is already fading by the time it reaches the ceiling, and the tip of the wick glows orange for a few seconds, a tiny ember that dims and then goes dark. The room falls into complete blackness, a darkness so sudden and absolute that it feels almost like a pressure against your eyes, and you sit motionless in the middle of it, letting the darkness settle around you. The silence that follows the lamp's extinction is different from the silence that accompanied its burning. It is deeper, heavier, a silence that has no center and no edge, and you listen to it as you might listen to the pause between two movements of a piece of music. The smell of spent shea butter lingers in the air, warm and nutty, and it mingles with the cooler scent of the night, the faint dustiness of old paper, and the clean, dry odor of the harmattan wind that barely stirs beyond the windows. You can feel the darkness on your skin, a slight coolness where the lamp's heat used to be, and you let the sensation pass through you without resistance. After a time you do not measure it, you begin to move. Your hands find the edge of the writing board by memory, and you use it to guide yourself to your feet, rising slowly, your joints protesting only slightly after the extended sitting. The dark is so complete that you cannot see the window grill, cannot see the door, cannot see your own hands when you hold them before your face. But you know the room as well as you know the shape of your own bed, and you move through it without stumbling. 2 steps to the niche, 1 step to the door, a hand on the plaster wall that is cool and rough under your palm. You gather the last of your personal items, the pen case, which you slide shut and tuck into the pouch at your waist, the small knife which you return to its sheath, the practice sheet, now covered with stray marks and test strokes, which you fold and place in the small basket beside the door where scrap paper is collected for pulping. The inkwell you will leave here its remaining ink still usable tomorrow, and you check the cork stopper to be sure it is tight before setting it back in its place on the board. You also leave the ruler and the compass and the spatula and the box of sand, all of them tools that belong to the room and will be here when you return. You make your way to the door and push it open. The gallery beyond is as dark as the room, but the courtyard below holds a faint ambient glow from the stars that fill the moonless sky. The starlight is not strong enough to cast shadows, but it defines the open space of the courtyard as a rectangle of slightly less darkness, and the pillars of the arcade stand against it like silent sentinels. You step out onto the gallery and close the door behind you, the latch falling into place with a small click, and you stand for a moment with your hands on the balustrade, looking up at the stars that you have spent the day copying. They are all there. The constellations you know by heart and by hand, Andromeda, faint but visible near the zenith, Cassiopeia, her W shape unmistakable, Perseus with the small pulsing glint of Algol in the Gorgon's head, Orion striding across the western sky with his belt aligned like 3 pearls on a string, Sirius blazing low on the horizon, its white light trembling in the unsteady air near the earth. The Milky Way arches across the entire dome, a river of soft luminescence exactly as the author described it, and you follow its course with your eyes, tracing the dark rifts in the bright clouds, the celestial geography that you have just transferred from one page to another. The sky is the original manuscript, and you are a copyist, working from its pages, and the thought, when it comes, is not a thought so much as a quiet recognition of something you have always known. You descend the stairs slowly, one hand on the cool wall, and at the bottom you find the vestibule dark and empty. The librarian has gone to his own rest, the tea things put away, the brazier cold. The tamarind tree in the courtyard is a silhouette against the starfield, its leaves motionless in the still air, and the sand glows faintly with the accumulated starlight of 1,000 nights. You cross the courtyard, your sandals making the only sound in the vast silence, a soft shuffle that is swallowed immediately by the space around you. The eastern gate, where you entered so many hours ago, is now a dark archway, but the small wicket door within the larger door is still unlocked. The gatekeeper always leaves it so for the scholars who work late, and you push it open and step through into the lane outside. The air here is cooler and fresher, carrying the distant scent of the river and the nearer scent of dust and old brick. The lane is empty, the houses along it dark and silent, their doors barred for the night. You walk slowly, retracing the path you took in the darkness before dawn, past the baobab tree whose bark you touched on the way here, and you touch it again now. The same gesture of continuity, its trunk cool and solid under your fingers. The stars accompany you all the way home, the same stars you copied, and the same stars that shone on the astronomer Al-Sufi and the scholars of the Madrasah and the caravan masters and the Bedouin who named the lunar mansions. They asked nothing of you, and you asked nothing of them. But the silent companionship between an observer and the observed is the oldest relationship in the world, and you walk in its embrace. You reach your own door, lift the latch, step into the dark corridor, and move without sound to the sleeping mat where you began this day. You remove your sandals, fold your cloak, and lie down on the mat, your body settling into the same impression it has worn for years. The last thing you see before sleep comes is not a star, not a page, but the faint, remembered glow of a Shea butter lamp, and then you close your eyes and the day is complete.